On a cold October night in 2003, Shirley Yates of Seattle, Washington was just about to get ready for bed when she heard a knock at the door. She approached the door and asked the person on the other side to identify themselves. The voice outside responded immediately. It was a salesman who just wanted a few moments of Mrs. Yates' time. This was odd for two reasons. First, it was almost 10 o'clock at night, much later than is usual for door-to-door salesmen. And second, the knock hadn't come from Mrs. Yates's front door. It was coming from the door to her bathroom. Has your home ever been visited by a door-to-door salesman? If you were born in the last 40 years, then your answer to that question is probably no. In the age of online shopping, the idea of a salesperson going from house to house hawking vacuum cleaners or encyclopedia sets feels like a relic from the past. It's highly unlikely you'd ever see one walking the streets nowadays, and equally unlikely that one would knock on your front door. However, if you live in Washington state, you might need to be wary of a certain salesman who is still doing the rounds. SCP-1879, also known as the indoor salesman and the doorman, is a phenomenon that manifests randomly in homes throughout Washington. Subjects will hear persistent knocking from the interior doors of their homes, and the affected door becomes classified as SCP-1879-1. The knocking doesn't stop until the door is opened, at which point the subject will be greeted by SCP-1879-2, a Caucasian man of indeterminate age standing around 170 centimeters tall. The man will claim to be a salesman and immediately try to pitch a bizarre product to the subject whose home he's just invaded. The SCP Foundation was first alerted to the existence of the indoor salesman when they had intercepted a 911 call coming from the home of Mrs. Shirley Yates. She had opened the door to her bathroom in an attempt to get the salesman to stop knocking, and once he was in her home, he refused to leave. According to Yates, he kept disappearing in and out of random doors in her house. Foundation Field Agent Rogers was equipped with a recording device and sent in to investigate the case with several other agents. When he arrived at the home, he found Mrs. Yates inconsolable. SCP-1879-2 was still rapidly talking at her, and strangely enough, the product he was holding and trying to sell to her was a border collie puppy. As soon as Agent Rogers entered the room, the man shifted his attention away from Mrs. Yates and towards him. He then started trying to sell the puppy to Agent Rogers. Agent Rogers did not want to purchase this puppy, but he found that the man spoke so quickly and urgently, he couldn't get a word in edgewise. The man was begging Rogers to take the puppy, practically shoving it in his face, saying that he didn't need any money, and that the only payment he needed would be some of your time. Rogers grew so annoyed at being talked over and interrupted that he ordered the other field agents to apprehend the indoor salesman. They did so, but as soon as the agents walked him out of the front door of the house, he disappeared without a trace. The agents remained in the area to monitor the situation. SCP-1879-2 manifested again in Mrs. Yates's home 6 hours later, still trying to trade the puppy for no money, just a little of her time, 12 years to be precise. After hours and hours of being worn down by this supernaturally pushy salesman, Yates relented and agreed to take the puppy, and immediately disappeared. The indoor salesman then disappeared himself through the closet door before he could be apprehended again. At a loss for what to do, the agents administered Class A amnestics to Mrs. Yates's family and left. The reason for her disappearance wasn't fully known until 12 years later in 2015, when she reappeared in the same spot she disappeared from, having no concept of how much time had passed. The puppy really had just cost her 12 years of her life. Stories like that of Shirley Yates have popped up all over the state in the years since, from Everett to Walla Walla and everywhere in between. Due to the random nature of SCP-1879 events and the way the indoor salesman can disappear instantly in and out of any door in a building, the SCP Foundation has been unable to capture him. The best they've been able to do is monitor 911 calls from across the state, listening for keywords that might indicate another SCP-1879 infestation. When such an event is reported, the Foundation deploys Mobile Task Force Row 4, aka Shoes Salesman. This task force's entire purpose is to minimize the amount of harm the indoor salesman is able to cause by intercepting him before he can make a sale. This is a very important task, as evidenced by the story of Mrs. Yates, since while the products this salesman sells might be innocent, he doesn't accept payment in any normal currency. The price he asks for his products are always bizarre and often deadly. If all someone loses is 12 years of their life, they could be considered to be getting off easy. In one instance, the product being sold was a single red rose in exchange for the subject's heart. Once the deal was sealed, the subject dropped dead on the spot, with an autopsy revealing that his heart and circulatory system vanished from inside his body. In another, the indoor salesman offered 220 bananas and told the subject to simply give him some sugar. The subject agreed, and all candied goods in the home disappeared. In a third, the indoor salesman was trying to sell a thermonuclear warhead, the price of which was the subject's soul. The subject accepted, and at first nothing seemed to have happened. The Foundation confiscated the warhead and placed it into non-anomalous containment. Later that day, the subject went to listen to some music, only to find that 2 of her vinyl records had gone missing: Lady Soul and Almighty Fire by world-famous soul singer Aretha Franklin. So, even though he's incredibly invasive, annoying, and his transactions can be deadly, the indoor salesman still maintains a sense of humor. The fact that the Foundation can't capture the indoor salesman means that a lot of questions about him remain unanswered. The biggest by far is why he does what he does. In most SCP-1879 events, the indoor salesman seems frantic and desperate to make a sale. Often he will refer to having quotas and deadlines to meet, which implies some other unseen entity that he has to answer to. These questions remain unanswered because all attempts to interrogate the indoor salesman have been unsuccessful. When he manifests in a location, it's impossible to get him to stray from his sales pitch, and he disappears as soon as he successfully sells his wares. However, there was one instance where, after an SCP-1879 event took place, Foundation agents were there to witness a rare interaction between the indoor salesman and his mysterious employers. Agent Rogers and the rest of the shoes salesmen were called out to a home in Spokane, where rapid knocking had begun to emanate from the bedroom door. Equipped with recording devices, Rogers was able to record the voice of the indoor salesman coming from inside the bedroom. In the recording, the salesman grumbled to himself about not being able to meet his quota by tomorrow, saying that if he didn't, he'd be stuck in this world for the next century. He started knocking again, yelling through the door that he knew they were home. He kept knocking until he was interrupted by the sound of a phone ringing. The indoor salesman was heard picking it up, and Rogers managed to record the conversation. The person calling was, apparently, the indoor salesman's boss, who was calling to complain about his performance. Only one side of the conversation was heard, but evidently the indoor salesman's boss wasn't too happy about receiving 2 Aretha Franklin albums as payment instead of an actual human soul. The indoor salesman apologized for the joke, then told his boss, "It won't happen again, please don't hurt it. I'll meet the quota this time, I swear." He hung up, grumbling to himself again, "I better get to move up to at least accounting this time. I've paid my dues and then some." Rogers finally opened the door to the apparent disappointment of the indoor salesman, who was hoping to speak with the home's owner and was quite annoyed at having another one of his sales interrupted by MTF Row 4. Rogers tried to ask the indoor salesman who he'd just been speaking to on the phone, but as usual, the salesman started talking over him. "Now see here, let's think logically," he said. "You know I'm not going to tell you anything. I know you're not likely to buy what I'm selling. So let's just move on to greener pastures. I'm coming up close to a deadline, and I'm sure you're swamped with making sure good people don't lose their jobs, so I'll just be on my way and let you do that. Ciao." The indoor salesman tried to close the door, but Agent Rogers blocked it with his arm. He was tired of this SCP giving him the runaround, and he was going to keep the indoor salesman here if it was the last thing he did. He demanded the entity stay and be interviewed, and other members of the task force apprehended the salesman, making sure he couldn't leave the room. The indoor salesman, now held in place by several armed men, seemed to finally relent. He told Rogers, "I'm busy, so I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you something, no money out of your pocket, and we'll call it even. Sound good?" Rogers, just wanting to get this whole thing over with, agreed to those terms. 3 seconds later, every agent on the scene was dead. and the indoor salesman was able to straighten his tie, pick up his briefcase, and walk through the door to the bathroom. When the bodies of Agent Rogers and the rest of the MTF Row 4 were examined by Foundation scientists, the cause of death was found to be, in every case, thousands of coins suddenly appearing in not only their pockets, but also inside their stomachs, lungs, and even under their skin. Later that day, the indoor salesman was reported at a home in the same neighborhood. He was seen trying to sell the house's owner, 80-year-old retiree Alan Johnson, a Glock 18 pistol in exchange for his attention. As he had done so many times before, the indoor salesman disappeared through another door before the Foundation was able to reach the scene. And when the SCP arrived, they found Mr. Johnson still alive, but now missing his prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that controls attention. It's likely that, because of the nature of the entity, SCP-1879 might be entirely impossible to contain. The Foundation might never find out anything more than what they already know about the indoor salesman, the way he's able to manifest behind closed doors, or the reason he has to keep filling quotas for an unseen boss who apparently doesn't have a very good sense of humor. So, if you're ever in Washington State, be careful who you open your doors to, especially if the knocking you hear is coming from inside your house. Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to? Something that made you feel off? Something you regret? Secrets like these are best kept to yourself, but since you're still alive, whatever you saw wasn't nearly as bad as what Peter Holland saw one fateful night in January of 2015. Peter was an unremarkable man, an office worker, slaving away at the daily grind. And like a lot of people, Peter enjoyed nothing more than coming home after a long, hard day, kicking back and watching some TV. It was this innocent activity that led to Peter's horrifying brush with SCP-5049, altering the course of his otherwise average life forever. The event started at around 10:05 p.m. Peter was channel surfing, glued to the couch in his sparsely furnished apartment. Commercials, 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 as far as Peter's tired eyes could see. He paused for a moment to watch the end of an ad for a car he could never hope to afford on his salary. But something stopped him from changing the channel again. The next ad had begun, and it was playing a strange, scratchy jingle that gave Peter an odd sense of unease. But even stranger than that was the text on screen. Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot in baby blue bubble lettering. He forced a smile. This had to be some weird comedy skit or viral marketing campaign, or maybe it was something he drank. But no, this was a real commercial, and things were about to get even weirder. The peppy logo faded to a concerning sight. A tall humanoid figure dressed like a used car salesman, but one that definitely wasn't human. His skin was dark green and covered in patches of thick fur. He had long fingers with intimidating claws and a grin full of needle-like fangs. It looked almost demonic, and after a few seconds, the demon began to speak.
Hey there, folks, it's your man, Demon Dan, coming at you with the latest and greatest deals from Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. We've just accepted a shipment of brand new models that would make even the most discerning customers weep with excitement. Let's see what we've got.
The creature, apparently named Demon Dan, stepped away from his desk, revealing two long, furry goat legs that ended in large, pointed hooves. Peter now assumed he really was going crazy, but at this point he was along for the ride. Demon Dan continued his pitch.
Looking to make your way through the capitalist hellscape that makes home look cozy? Come try one of our newest businessman models.
Dan gestured behind him to where Peter was horrified to see a total of 52 adult male human bodies hanging from a wall. There was something uncanny about them. They seemed almost hollow, like a highly realistic costume or a prop from a horror movie. Peter didn't have much time to think about it though, as Demon Dan went on.
If you're looking for an extra challenge of inequality, the businesswoman model may be a right fit for you.
The commercial then revealed a wall of human female bodies strung up in a similar fashion.
Now, you may be thinking, but Dan, business sounds hard, I just want to have some fun. And the fine team here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot have got you covered.
The camera zoomed out to show an area of the store filled with children's decorations, and more of these strange, hollowed-out human suits in child sizes to match.
And who has more fun than kids? No one, that's who. For a limited time, the purchase of any child-size unit comes with a complimentary 50% off coupon for parental units. You just can't say no to a deal like that.
Before Peter could process the madness that was unfolding before him, the camera cut again. The store's logo appeared on the screen once more, along with several cuts to locations around the store itself. There were more human bodies, hundreds of them. Demon Dan's sleazy voice rang out over all of it.
Here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, we know it's not all fun and games. The bravest among us have a mission to accomplish. The Seven Lords are ever planning their invasion after all, so you're looking for function over form. Well, we've got that in spades down here in the Tactical Services Department. You'll be kicking ass in no time when you're wearing the latest models at the best prices.
Seven Lords? Invasion? What did any of this mean? Suddenly, the camera was showing him a new room. Red curtains parted, revealing more of these person suits, several bearing a striking resemblance to real human celebrities. He managed to make out Gucci Mane, Avril Lavigne, Paul McCartney, and Britney Spears before Demon Dan's appearance once again drew his attention.
I've got a special treat for you. We're happy to announce the VIP Lookalike Department. We all know how difficult the creation of Homunculus is. It's a fine art that takes years of practice. So when a replacement order on VIPs comes in, every detail needs to be perfect. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But for the right price, you too can look like famous icons from around the globe.
The image of celebrity bodies faded from view, and Peter was left looking at the grinning Demon Dan standing behind the front desk of his impossible store once more. He said,
"There you have it, folks. Come on down to Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. If you're viewing the advertisement, then you've been selected for entry. Please enter the nearest door for instant deals and upgrade those old duds for one of our newest models. What are you waiting for? Come on down."
The logo popped up again, hovering above some bold text that said, "Please enter the nearest door." Peter had had enough. He switched off the TV. What a horror show, he thought. They should just warn you before they put short horror films on TV like that. He had no idea they could just slip them in among regular commercials. Surely Demon Dan and his store couldn't be real, right? But as his eyes drifted to the door in his room, he didn't feel quite so certain. Well, there was only one way to find out. Peter got up, went over to the door, took a deep breath, and walked through it. Peter Holland was never seen again, not as himself, anyway. The SCP Foundation has long been aware of this sinister transmission, known as SCP-5049-2, and luckily has found ways to prevent it from claiming more victims. The Foundation Television Analysis Department, as well as webcrawler 40Y40, which is the software the Foundation uses to root out anomalous activity online, are always vigilant for signs of Demon Dan's commercial running. Just observing Demon Dan, who is himself classified as SCP-5049-A, and his ads put you in immediate danger, as they can transform any nearby doors into SCP-5049-1s. Those are interdimensional portals that remain active for around 15 minutes after viewing the ad. So then what specifically is SCP-5049? It's the entire pocket dimension known as Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, a Carrier-class spatial anomaly constantly on the lookout for new human victims, which it transforms into fleshy suits for its demonic clients, which let them blend in around humans. Prior to its discovery by the Foundation, it's likely that Demon Dan and his associates claimed hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. But sadly, even discovering this anomaly came at a gruesome cost to the Foundation. On February 16, 2020, the ad played on Safe Storage Warehouse 13's break room television. At the time of the broadcast, 4 Foundation personnel were present, including security agent William Birkin. Worrying that this was a potential security threat, Agent Birkin investigated the door to a nearby closet. The second he opened it, he was transformed to the storefront of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. He saw Demon Dan himself standing at the corner, while 4 smaller reptilian imps fought over a small flesh suit. Demon Dan scolded them, before turning his attention to Agent Birkin.
Tis, you aren't supposed to be here, little man. How naughty. I'm gonna have to have a word with marketing.
Once I'm through with you. Agent Birkin, fearing for his safety, drew his weapon and shot Demon Dan 3 times. the creature dematerialized before appearing right next to Agent Birkin and disarming him with a swift chop. The unfortunate security agent was then grabbed by the considerably larger Demon Dan and thrown over Dan's shoulder. We know all of this because Agent Birkin's standard issue Foundation body camera recorded the whole terrifying ordeal, even as Demon Dan dragged the helpless Birkin back into the twisted workshop behind the store. There, Birkin saw what would soon be his own fate right before his eyes. Dan's minions converting human bodies into fleshy suits for their demon clientele, and this unfortunate security officer was next. Dan gave him over to a pair of large sheep-like demons and told them to drain, skin, and declaw him. Birkin's video feed finally cut as the demons pulled out their rusty tools and began to work on him. Of course, the SCP Foundation wouldn't take an attack on one of their operatives, inside one of their facilities no less, lying down. The unfortunate death of William Birkin allowed the Foundation to refine their methods of intercepting the broadcast of Demon Dan's commercials. They even had a new mobile task force, Mobile Strike Force Kappa 11, or the Baphomet Bashers, specifically to deal with Demon Dan and his cronies. They did more than just prevent him from taking new humans, though. When the Baphomet Bashers teamed up with an A-class clairvoyant entity to improve their efficiency in predicting future broadcasts, they were able to launch sting operations and arrest 21 different demonic customers for interrogation. This impressive strike back finally gave the Foundation some meaningful leverage over Demon Dan. And through the use of their clairvoyant entity, they were able to call a temporary truce and arrange a meeting with Demon Dan himself. Captain Steiner, an agent of the Foundation External Negotiation Department, was the one to interrogate Demon Dan. They sat across from each other at a table, and Demon Dan was clearly tense, frustrated with the way the Foundation had been messing with his business. All of their sting operations were frightening off his customers. In return for letting him continue his work, the Foundation wanted Dan to turn over all the information on his bosses and customers, allowing the Foundation to track their movements. When Dan was evasive about whether he'd comply, they tried threatening him. Dan laughed them off.
Go ahead, take your best shot, little man. There's a dozen more just like me. You won't stop anything.
Finally, he was pressured into giving a yes or no answer as to whether he'd willingly collaborate with the Foundation and act as an informant against his kind. When Demon Dan hinted that he may be willing to comply, he began to make a horrifying gurgling noise and gripped his head in pain. He began speaking in Latin in a voice that wasn't his own, as though the 7 demon lords he served were speaking through him. They said, "You are a fool, jailer, to think a pathetic morsel such as this could aid you against us. I have allowed you to toil in your own delusions for far too long. You may have taken advantage of Asmodeus all those years ago, but you stop nothing. You hinder nothing. You jail and barter to no avail. Your time is coming." And then Demon Dan's head exploded, which obviously prevented him from giving any incriminating information on those he worked for. Whoever the Demon Lords are, they're certainly the secretive type. You may think that this is the end of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot and of SCP-5049, but soon another ad ran. It advertised the same products and services out of the same store. The only difference was that this time, a different entity was starring in it. There was nothing out of the ordinary about Timmy Mason. Like a lot of healthy 8-year-old boys, Timmy liked to go on little adventures in and around his neighborhood. And now that summer vacation had finally rolled around, he had more time than ever to explore. But during one particularly hot day, Timmy suddenly realized that he was exhausted. The heat was beginning to get to him, and he'd forgotten to pack a water bottle. All he had was a couple of dollars and a handful of quarters rattling around in his pocket. He was considering heading to a nearby corner store and purchasing a drink when he first heard the music. It was a tinny rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel playing in the distance, underscored by the rumbling of an engine. Timmy's face lit up. This could only mean one thing: an ice cream truck, just in time. He ran in the direction of the sounds, not wanting to miss out on the cool, sweet relief from the intense summer heat. But when the ice cream truck suddenly rounded a corner and came into view, Timmy felt a pang of anxiety. It didn't look like most of the ice cream trucks he had seen driving around his neighborhood in prior summers. It was shoddy, an older, more boxy model with peeling white paint. But it was so hot out that Timmy felt he couldn't afford to be picky if he wanted to cool off. The ice cream truck came to a noisy stop, and Timmy ran over. When he reached the side of the truck, he noticed some other strange details. There was no serving hatch in the back of the truck. The closest thing was a thin, dark groove cut into the driver's side door. A door that seemed almost drawn onto the side of the truck, rather than a door that looked like it could actually open. How could the driver get in? And adding to the strangeness, there was no menu on the truck either. Typically on your friendly neighborhood ice cream truck, you'd find a colorful collection of all the frozen treats you could buy, along with how much they'd cost you, but not here. Timmy gulped nervously. He knew something was wrong here, but for some reason he couldn't seem to pull himself away. He cleared his throat, forced a polite smile, and said, "Can I get a green popsicle, please?" There was a strange rumbling noise inside the ice cream truck. Suddenly, the slot in the door opened a little wider, and a long green popsicle in a plastic wrapper emerged. It came with a small piece of paper, with $5.75 in loose, scratchy handwriting on it. Timmy regarded the note with suspicion and said that he was sorry, but he didn't have $5.75. Something inside the truck began rumbling again, louder this time, more aggressive. While the truck growled from within, Timmy noticed something else was wrong. His popsicle was no ordinary popsicle. It was a dead snake, straightened out and frozen solid. Timmy screamed and dropped the so-called popsicle. He turned and began to run, but it was already too late. The slot behind him yawned open fully, and a rusty spring-loaded chain fired out like a harpoon. On the end of this chain was a large snapping bear trap, which quickly latched onto Timmy's left leg. The chain yanked and pulled him backwards, dragging him ever closer to the darkened crevice in the truck's door. Moments later, he was pulled inside and the hatch closed behind him. His screams were muffled, and then overpowered entirely by the rumbling within. Soon after, there was silence. And finally, the cheerful tune of Pop Goes the Weasel began to play once more. The truck drove away, prepared to serve its frozen delights to another child, somewhere, anywhere. Not long after Timmy was reported missing, another young boy bought a scoop of strawberry ice cream and a waffle cone from the same truck. The boy's mother was horrified to find that this alleged ice cream was full of what seemed like blood and raw meat. Lab tests later confirmed that this gory ice cream was a perfect genetic match for poor, missing Timmy Mason. It didn't take long for the SCP Foundation to get involved, seeing as mysterious, horrifying deaths like this one were often the first sign of an anomaly's presence in the area, and they were able to quickly track down and isolate the rogue ice cream truck. This wasn't especially difficult for the agents assigned to the case, since it literally announced its presence with loud, obnoxious music. While it was easy to find, the ice cream truck, soon designated SCP-1386, did however prove to be more difficult to contain than they first imagined. When a mobile task force attempted to engage the truck in hopes of apprehending it, an ear-splitting siren began to blast from the truck's undercarriage. This caused catastrophic inner-ear damage to everyone involved. Incidentally, it's now believed that the reason the ice cream truck engaged in this defensive behavior had nothing to do with the fact the mobile task force was armed, but rather because of what they weren't carrying. It appears that SCP-1386 doesn't turn on its siren because of danger, but when it detects that someone is approaching it who isn't carrying any money. Eventually, the Foundation was able to trick the ice cream truck into containment, luring it into a fake, walled-off neighborhood, where it could drive its rounds constantly without the risk of encountering civilians. All those who had previous encounters with the ice cream truck were given amnestic treatment, and SCP-1386 was finally, officially, contained. But while it had been taken off the streets, the Foundation's work was only just beginning. It was time for research to commence. The first key discoveries that aided in the investigation involved the factors that are required for SCP-1386 to even serve its subjects in the first place. As the previously mentioned mobile task force learned, you need to approach the truck with at least $20 in cash to be absolutely sure that it won't turn your ears inside out. The truck also proves to be extremely adept at reading human emotions, and refuses to serve anyone who doesn't appear happy. With these requirements now known, the Foundation felt prepared to finally make some orders. First, they sent in a pair of Level 3 researchers. Each of them requested a delicious cookies and cream flavored smoothie. The truck pushed both smoothies out of the slot in its door, one marked with the letter M and the other with the letter G. A handwritten receipt with a price of $4.89 written on it. They paid the price and the transaction ended without incident. The smoothies were apparently pretty good, too. Next, one of the researchers returned, perhaps longing for another taste of SCP-1386's wonderful ice cream. This time he requested a Neapolitan ice cream sandwich. The truck rumbled for a moment before dispensing what seemed to be a ham and cheese sandwich with slices of tomato. However, upon taking a bite out of the sandwich, the researcher found that this was actually just a perfect replica of a ham and cheese sandwich made from Neapolitan ice cream. The receipt released from the slot simply said, "April Fools," before the truck drove away without even asking for any payment. The same researcher would return to the ice cream truck one more time, this time requesting a single scoop of vanilla ice cream in a waffle cone. It was provided to him without issue, and he happily paid the 72 cents the truck requested in return. The next test wouldn't go quite as swimmingly, by which we mean it caused a horrifying death. This time, a slightly more senior researcher wanted to perform a test on the ice cream truck. He asked for a peach-flavored push pop, which he received without issue. However, when he refused to pay the price, an admittedly steep $16, all hell broke loose. As he tried to walk away, the hatch opened a full 6 feet, releasing its large, rusty metal trap around the senior researcher. He was pulled into the truck, followed by a horrific rumbling noise. Not long after, the slot began to spew a stream of pink liquid for a solid 5 minutes, before driving away. This pink puree was later proven to be a genetic match to the researcher. After this, the Foundation refused to allow any other researchers to interact with SCP-1386. Only D-Class personnel would be permitted to take part in the tests. In contrast to the senior researcher's horrifying death, the D-Class personnel seemed to get along extremely well with SCP-1386. The first D-Class asked for a cherry popsicle with nuts. The truck produced an unwrapped cherry popsicle with nuts embedded in the ice, along with a receipt reading $2.20, your nuts. The D-Class chuckled as he read the receipt and paid the truck without incident. The second D-Class requested a more esoteric treat, a Caesar salad flavor popsicle. However, the ice cream truck isn't one to back down from a challenge. It produced an off-green popsicle that tasted like, quote, lightly dressed lettuce with a hint of croutons. The next D-Class ordered a dark chocolate fudge pop, but wasn't able to pay an exact change. He gave the truck $2 bills and was given a carefully wrapped package with a crude drawing of US currency on the front. When the package was opened, he saw that it contained the exact change he required down to the penny. He made an official request to the Foundation to keep the change, but his request was denied. The Foundation then pushed its D-Class personnel to ask for more complex constructions, just to see what SCP-1386 was capable of. The next D-Class asked for a Kinder Surprise egg, the kind which are banned in the US due to their history as being a choking hazard. However, the ice cream truck didn't have a hard time constructing the egg, except this one was made out of ice cream rather than chocolate. It did seem beyond the truck's capability to create the toy inside, instead including a small piece of paper reading, "I owe you one toy." The next interaction wasn't quite as cordial. The D-Class requested 1 cherry ice lolly, 1 cherry ice pop, 1 cherry popsicle, and 1 cherry-flavored drink, frozen. This resulted in the ice cream truck making a horrifying noise, described as being like someone skinning a cat in reverse. It then unceremoniously ejected the red ice, causing it to shatter on the ground, before releasing a styrofoam cup filled with frozen green liquid. This liquid was shown to contain huge quantities of arsenic, but was thankfully impossible to drink, on account of the fact that its melting point is so high that it's impossible to liquefy with current technology. And our current knowledge of SCP-1386 testing ends with its strangest story of all. A nonverbal D-Class was instructed to write his order on a piece of paper to pass to the truck, in hopes of seeing if it would respond to written commands. A slot opened up in the door a few inches lower than the usual slot, and a thin, flesh-colored appendage slithered out. its hand a kind of two-fingered pincher. It took the note from the D-Class and gave him an ice cream cone in return. The D-Class was visibly disturbed by the hand, saying that it looked horrifying and smelled like death. He even refused to eat the ice cream, saying that he'd lost his appetite. But other D-Classes capable of verbal articulation did not report any strange occurrences with the hand. They said that they found the hand to look completely normal, and as time went on, they began to trust the ice cream truck with increasing devotion, while their mistrust in the disturbed, mute D-Class only grew. In the strangest twist of all, this D-Class was later found dead in his cell from strangulation. The D-Class was alone in his cell, and there were no signs of forced entry. Perhaps he should have enjoyed his ice cream while he still could. You know what they say, I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. And no ice cream is more scream-worthy than the one served up by SCP-1386. Working at the SCP Foundation can really get your appetite going. After spending a rough shift monitoring the acid levels in SCP-682's tank, or performing the rituals necessary to keep the Devourer of Worlds on the other side of SCP-2317, sometimes you just need a quick snack to hold you over before you return to the old grind. Problem is, at the SCP Foundation, even the break room can be perilous. Dr. Dan is notorious for pilfering pudding cups from the communal fridge, and ever since the administrator himself stole your tuna sandwich, you just don't feel safe spending your lunch break on site anymore. But this presents its own series of issues. You only have an hour for lunch, and obviously you can't order in due to security issues. Also, if you're eating off-site, you have even less time to finish your lunch because the site you're currently stationed at is relatively remote. We're talking at least a half-hour round trip to actually get to somewhere, so you're gonna need your food fast. And when it comes to fast food, few eateries are as prolific as the Golden Arches, McDonald's. And just to clarify, this video is not sponsored. We're gonna tell you about a horrifying anomalous secret that this company really doesn't want you to know about. Let's not think about that just yet though. Your stomach is rumbling, and you need that quarter pounder so bad that even being trapped in the red reality with Dr. Scranton couldn't stop you from getting it. When you finally arrive, you buy your typical order. A quarter pounder with french fries, a coffee, and a McFlurry. You see Dr. Clef a few tables down enjoying a box of chicken nuggets and ketchup, but decide not to engage. As you sit and enjoy your meager little lunch, knowing you'll probably be coordinating the cleaning efforts of SCP-173's containment chamber by the end of the day, your eyes drift over to something even more unsettling. Happy, the current mascot for McDonald's Happy Meals. You can't help but shudder. You've seen some pretty horrific things on the job. Nightmarish things. You fear no monster, but that thing, it scares you. Those big, soulless eyes, the wide, gaping maw full of two white teeth. Its diabolical sneakers. No child should ever have to look at that. You can't help but wonder, whatever happened to Ronald McDonald, the hamburger-happy clown that shilled fast food to you throughout your childhood? What is he up to now? Well, we have an answer for you, but I'll warn you, you may not be quite as eager to suck down a Big Mac and a Diet Coke after hearing this. Ronald McDonald, first introduced as the company's mascot in 1963, had a pretty good run, before finally being largely phased out by the company in the mid-2010s for a greater focus on the nasty little box homunculus. You can thank John Wayne Gacy, Pennywise, and those goofballs dressed up as clowns back in 2016 for that. But like anyone who loses favor stateside, Ronald had a prosperous career ahead of him outside the country. Well, not the Ronald we know, at least. You see, in an undisclosed cattle farm in 2004, most likely in North America, a monster was born. A horrific abomination birthed from a cow, like many have theorized about SCP-058, the Heart of Darkness. But this nasty little creature wasn't a giant heart with a stinger and scorpion legs. In many ways, it appeared superficially humanoid, save for its stark white skin, its thick red lips, and its full head of bright, frizzy red hair. But that was only the start of the unnerving strangeness exhibited by this miracle child. It was born with white gloves and long, clownish shoes seemingly grafted to its feet. Fresh from birth, the creature was huge, with a disproportionately large head and wide, disgusting pores that seemed to perpetually leak fry oil. The creature was unresponsive to any kind of external stimuli, perhaps suggesting it was brain dead. and it remained completely dormant most of the time. While most people would have screamed, run away, or called the police, the farmers at this particular cattle farm decided to let it ride and see how this whole nightmarish affair played out. That sense of curiosity and patience would soon pay off for them financially. It didn't take long for the creature to grow. The bigger it got, the more it looked like a giant mutant version of McDonald's iconic mascot, Ronald McDonald. And this wasn't just a coincidence either. It turned out that this monster was somehow intrinsically linked to the McDonald's brand, because once a day the creature would horrifically unhinge its jaw and begin to barf out a huge quantity of McDonald's food. And we're not talking about raw materials that are converted into McDonald's food. The creature, later dubbed SCP-5962, vomited out fully packaged McDonald's products. The owners of this clownish monster had just hit the lottery, so to speak. While the particulars of the deal are unclear, they somehow contacted a representative of the McDonald's Corporation based in China. In exchange for presumably a large sum of money, Chinese McDonald's operatives covertly entered the country and shepherded the now massive creature over to a McDonald's-owned warehouse in Beijing. By this point, it was around 4 meters tall and weighed over 5 tons. It was kept inside a cage and housed at some cost, but soon enough, the creature was paying for itself. As we mentioned before, the creature constantly secreted fry oil, which was siphoned off for use in preparing McDonald's food across the country. The huge quantity of packaged food that it vomited out every day was also shipped off to restaurants across the country, making the Chinese branch of McDonald's incredibly financially successful. They were able to make an almost complete profit on all of these foods and drinks, once transport costs were subtracted, of course. SCP-5962 had become McDonald's China's best-kept secret. But of course, no secret this sensational could stay under wraps forever, no matter how much people in the warehouse were paid or threatened for their silence. If your day job was siphoning grease off of a giant mutant clown for the purpose of preparing McDonald's food across the country, there'd be no way you wouldn't speak to somebody about it. Nobody knows whose loose lips sunk this incredibly profitable ship, but rumors began to spread around Beijing about a huge clown inside of a McDonald's packaging facility. That was when local field agents of the SCP Foundation finally took notice. 2 agents, Jonathan Zhang and George Nagasaw, were dispatched to perform an infiltration mission along with a team of backup personnel. They entered the warehouse, apprehending any employees they found. As they and their reinforcements reached the northern side of the facility, they found SCP-5962 with a heavy collar around its neck, chained to the ground like King Kong, as McDonald's employees wheeled away carts of packaged food. Neither of the attending agents were fans of McDonald's food, but even then, just seeing this horrible display was enough to make them feel nauseous. The creature was taken and contained by the SCP Foundation, who conducted a number of tests on it. They found that the monster had no real internal organs save for 27 interconnected stomachs. Genetically, they also found that the creature was far more cow than human. The same could sadly not be said for the food that SCP-5962 was vomiting out. Seriously, if you were already feeling a little queasy from all this, we need to warn you that this is the part where things get really vile. Let's talk about what the McDonald's food barfed up by SCP-5962 was actually made out of. As we mentioned earlier, the food exuded by the creature was genetically human, with DNA often matching that of people who are alive and in no way affected by this anomalous process. Tests have indicated that certain foods, condiments, and beverages correspond to more specific types of bodily tissue and liquid. For example, the bacon and fries were shown to be cartilage and ligaments. The bread turned out to be made from hair, nails, and skin. The coffee was liquefied fecal matter. The chicken nuggets were made from fingers, ovaries, and testes. Even the water was a mix of saline and sweat. And of course, the ice cream was comprised of pus, bone marrow, feces, and nasal mucus, depending on the flavor. You get the idea. We'll stop listing off examples before you lose your lunch, but rest assured, all of the food produced by SCP-5962 was made of human organic matter. When the SCP Foundation interviewed Mr. Chen, the manager of the facility where SCP-5962 was being held, before his amnestic treatment, he seemed incredibly casual about the whole thing. As far as he was concerned, the food still tasted exactly the same as regular McDonald's food, and it didn't appear to have any adverse health effects beyond what you could expect from regular non-anomalous fast food. It's actually less cruel and disturbing than the slaughterhouses where the meat is typically obtained. Mr. Chen also contested that SCP-5962 wasn't all that dangerous either. The only time it ever performed a defensive action was when an employee of the enemy fast food franchise, Burger King, entered its vicinity. The creature vomited a stream of hot coffee at the corporate interloper like a fire hose until he left, suggesting that it does have some kind of strange inherent loyalty to the McDonald's company. But still, other than this isolated incident, the creature has never even displayed sentience. It was a big, strange, clownish McDonald's food dispenser. When questioned about the origins of SCP-5962, Mr. Chen once again underplayed the strangeness of the situation, saying that he'd heard rumors the farm that sold him SCP-5962 had also sold other strange, anomalous creatures to eager buyers in the US. The farm, which we can only assume is situated right next to a radioactive waste dump, was also behind SCP-4158, also known as Big Charlie. This giant omnivorous and seemingly immortal mutant cow is believed to have been birthed from a non-anomalous cow sold to the Butcher's Block slaughterhouse. It looked hideous and seemed to suffer from a wide variety of health issues, leading to the employees at the slaughterhouse trying to put the creature out of its misery. However, no matter how hard they tried to kill the monster, it just wouldn't die. Its bones were pretty much indestructible, and no matter how much of its flesh was cut off, it just kept growing back, causing no ill effects to the creature itself. Eventually, the slaughterhouse workers tried cooking and eating the meat, leading to them discovering it tasted just as good as non-anomalous meat. Much like the Chinese McDonald's and SCP-5962, the workers had just hit the lottery with Big Charlie. As long as they kept feeding the monster, which ate everything from bricks to other non-anomalous cows, it provided a pretty much limitless supply of meat, giving them unprecedented economic prosperity. In other words, Big Charlie was a literal cash cow. Jeff Fine, the slaughterhouse director, even started worshipping Big Charlie as a kind of demigod by drinking his blood. He believed that Big Charlie was a savior, sent to lift them all out of their struggle and desperation. Sadly for them, the SCP Foundation sent them right back when Big Charlie escaped their slaughterhouse, and Foundation field agents found, secured, and contained it. It was a sad day for the Butcher's Block. So, what have we learned today? Whether you're in the US of A or the Chinese heartland, if you're chowing down on fast food, you really have no idea where it came from. I mean, we kind of knew that already, but for all we know, the food you're enjoying could have just been vomited up by a giant fat clown, or cut from the flesh of a mutated cow. Just think about that next time you're enjoying a burger. But hey, let's be honest with ourselves. We'll all probably still eat it.
Oh, what a horrible night to have the munchies.
You think to yourself, as you stroll down the lamplit sidewalk, heading back to your apartment from your friend Craig's house. While Craig is a good hang when you need to get your fix of video games and anime, neither of you are master chefs. The fuel of the afternoon snacks you devoured several hours ago have long since faded, leaving only emptiness and hunger. You wish that you had ordered a double cheese pepperoni pizza when you had the chance. But what could even be open at this time of night? And what could satisfy your very specific cravings? You decide to take a shortcut through the local woods, since you know the path so well. Then, you see it. A neon open sign is perched on the window of Papa John's Pizzeria, which itself sits impossibly within the branches of an enormous beech tree. Your desire for pizza has been answered by the universe, and you feel like you are on top of the world. The promised land is right there before you. But of course, your mind was already in a state of bliss before you encountered this strange arboreal location for a chain restaurant. You see, when you were at Craig's house, the two of you participated in an exchange of dank recreational herbalism. You did some indoor baking. You had a green day. Like the great poet and musician Bob Dylan sang, "Everybody must get stoned." And right now, as you gaze up at a Papa John's Pizzeria, you feel just like everyone. You make sure that sweet za awaits you if you are able to climb the tree trunk into the branches. You grab hold of the bark and move in, up to the door and the one exposed window. With thoughts of pepperoni and artichoke toppings dancing in your mind, you enter Papa John's. The interior is dank and musty, but to your surprise, the restaurant seemed just like any ordinary Papa John's location. It was brightly lit and inviting, and the menu seemed to have all of the classics that you, an avid Papa John's customer, were accustomed to. You approached the counter to place your pizza order, delighted that things were going so smoothly. Excuse me? You say, feeling a bit like baked bread. "Can I have 2 large, medium pizzas?" There's a scrambling of footsteps from the back of the kitchen as an employee emerges to greet you. A red blur crosses your vision as you see the iconic Papa John's uniform and the unusual green entity wearing it. This humanoid creature stands almost a meter tall and has lime green skin. You were immediately reminded of the goblins you encountered in one of Craig's RPG games. In your current Empire state of mind, you weren't about to question why an infamous fantasy monster was manning the register. You were way too hungry for that. Fortunately, it seemed like the creature understood.
2 large medium pizzas coming right up.
The gainful goblin employee noted.
That'll be $20.99.
Despite the bizarre setup, it seemed like your dollar was still good in Papa John's pizza tree. You fish around in your wallet for the correct sum, watching as the goblin barks orders to its fellow employees, another goblin who was gathering ingredients for the pizza. These ingredients were very much not what you expected. As if practicing some obscure form of woodland alchemy, the goblin chef lays out a bark pizza crust, spreads some pine sap over its surface, and then places some unknown substances in lieu of toppings. You aren't sure how to describe the substance, but the goblin poured it onto the pizza from what looked like a potion bottle. It was definitely some Keebler Elves tech for sure. You're only able to get a brief glimpse of it before the ultra-vegetarian pizza is taken out of sight, and your eyes shift down to the disgruntled face of the goblin employee. He taps the register impatiently as you realize you'd been zoning out instead of handing over your cash. You fork over $21 and receive a penny back as change. It's a regular penny with good old Honest Abe on it and everything. You were almost expecting some kind of bizarre goblin currency, so this was neat, but then again, a penny on its own is hardly worth much. You decide to deposit the copper token into the take a penny leave a penny dish on the counter. Then you stumble over to one of the wooden tables and take your seat and wait for your food. At this point, you're pretty zooted, so this whole thing is feeling a lot more like a dream than reality. You wonder if Craig would believe your story and sent him a text. "Hey, Broham, I'm at the secret Papa John's." To drive the point home, you snap a selfie of yourself in the interior, with the goblin in uniform lurking in the background. He's totally gonna flip out, you think to yourself. Soon, your pizzas are complete. As the small green man behind the counter hands you the box, you check inside to see if the quirks of the rustic craftsmanship are still evident. You're pleased when you see that both pizzas appear to be entirely normal Papa John's pizzas. You thank the hardworking humanoids working in the restaurant and exit carefully, making sure not to drop the pizzas as you descend. With your pizzas in hand, you start to feel as if you're returning to your normal senses. You take a look over your shoulder at the pizzeria and realize that it is totally absent from the tree it was in moments ago. The pizzas are still warm in your hands, but the Papa John's where you purchased them has blinked out of existence. You quickly look at the picture on your phone to find that your selfie doesn't depict the interior of a Papa John's, but rather it is simply a photo of yourself sitting in the branches of a beech tree. Craig responded to the image with, "Dude, lay off the grass, will you?" You, like many others in Catskill, New York, were paying customers of the non-Euclidean Papa John's, which has been designated SCP-3835. This extra-dimensional eatery has been deemed safe by the SCP Foundation, and many researchers agree that the pizza served there is quite good by Papa John's standards. The main anomalous property of SCP-3835 is that it can only be located under specific chemical circumstances. The key to seeing and entering into SCP-3835 is to be under the influence of THC, a psychoactive substance found in cannabis plants. An unaffected person cannot interact with the restaurant and will only perceive the location as an ordinary beech tree. In other words, you need to be this high to get inside. To make sure that the premises SCP-3835 is always observed, an entire mobile task force has been assigned to use THC while patrolling the area where the anomaly resides. Fittingly enough, this task force has been given the call sign Delta 20 and the code name Blaze It. There are certainly far worse security details to be put on at the Foundation, especially since access to the pizza is another perk. While the usage of THC and its related products are required while on the job, The protocols regarding when Mobile Task Force agents can enter SCP-3835 are slightly stricter. When it comes to non-Euclidean spaces, that is, spaces with larger interiors than the exteriors would imply, the conditions that allow entry and exit, as well as the duration of existence within the space, must be carefully and continuously measured. A miscalculation could result in a permanent departure from all known dimensions, even on the potentially safest sites. Couple the risks with the lapses in judgment caused by having heavy amounts of THC in the blood, and the importance of rigorous testing becomes obvious. The results of an experiment performed by a Foundation researcher by the name of Dr. Garfield shows that SCP-3835's extra-dimensional space, while generally not fatal, does risk harm to the unlikely occupant whose THC level dips below the required level. During the test, Dr. Garfield himself spent several hours inside the restaurant until the high he felt during entry faded away. Slowly but surely, the interior of the Papa John's vanished as well, leaving Dr. Garfield tumbling haplessly out of the branches. There was little ambiguity in the findings. It was clear that even when an individual has met the threshold to have entered the Papa John's, that individual will still lose contact with SCP-3835 the very moment that the THC is not sufficiently active in their system. While this is true of the location itself, any pizzas purchased within do not disappear when taken outside of the restaurant. When compared side by side to the equivalent menu items from a standard Papa John's, the composition of the pizza is indistinguishable. Lab tests have even shown that the ingredients are chemically the same. The foundations of a pizza, cheese, bread, tomato sauce, are all accounted for, as is any topping or additional ingredient that can be found on the Papa John's menu. This is despite the on-site observations that the pizzas are not constructed on these ingredients to start with. Tree material, as well as unknown ichors provided by the non-human staff, form the raw materials of each food item initially and are changed into equivalent Papa John's items through an unseen process. While researchers have inquired into the nature of this transmutation, the proven fact that the pizzas are safe outweighs any concerns beyond academic curiosity. At the moment, the mysteries of how these arcane ingredients function are known only to the short green humanoid entities that serve as the staff of SCP-3835. These self-proclaimed goblins have been designated as SCP-3835-1 and share the safe object class with the non-Euclidean restaurant itself. Although SCP-3835-1 instances are primarily invested in delivering the highest quality of service to all customers within the restaurant, there have been occasions where SCP-3835-1 instances have divulged information about their history with the restaurant. According to an interview with one particular SCP-3835-1 instance, Hortith Ramos of House Valkyne, this location has been a safe haven for many members of the goblinoid ancestry for several generations of human civilizational development. For as long as SCP-3835-1 have inhabited SCP-3835, the entities have bartered with the human population in exchange for goods. SCP-3835, being styled after a Papa John's pizzeria, is only the latest in a series of marketplaces that have contributed to human anomaly relations. It is currently unknown whether or not the official Papa John's brand has endorsed SCP-3835, or is even aware of the branch location, but more is being done to look into it. What is known is that the pizza produced on site can not only be purchased with non-anomalous currency, but also traded for if the customer has something that an SCP-3835-1 instance wants. The bartering system of ancient civilization seems to be honored to the same extent as fiat currency, as long as the deal that is struck is fair in the eyes of all present SCP-3835-1 instances. Fortunately, while the SCP-3835-1 can be surly and a bit blunt in their communication, the entities are generally friendly with human beings and will accept haggled prices if it means having another satisfied customer. As far as we know, the SCP-3835-1 instances wish to maintain a diplomatic relationship with the human race and presently view pizza as the commodity that guarantees such good terms. They are reluctant to reveal whether or not the anomalous properties of SCP-3835 relating to THC are due to a direct use of supernatural abilities by the instances. It is possible that humans under the influence of THC are thought to be more docile and suggestible, and this makes them less prone to question the presence of the SCP-3835-1 instances at all. It has certainly allowed the SCP-3835-1 and their restaurant to avoid discovery until very recently when a junior researcher by the name of Umar Hadid found the location during a leave of absence from the Foundation. Researcher Hadid was chosen as the recipient of the Greenhead Explorer Award due to his ventures into the extrasensory plane unlocked through the use of THC. While the discovery of SCP-3835 might imply that other similar locations might be concealed behind the veil of perception, to go searching for them would require an unusually high amount of trial and error. What's more, the SCP-3835-1 are continually vague about whether or not there are more of their kind running restaurants for human benefit. Since SCP-3835 was discovered, various plant-friendly members of the Foundation have become regular customers at this particular Papa John's. The SCP-3835-1 instances, for their part, are more than happy to accept Foundation money, and have expressed appreciation for the protection that the Mobile Task Force provides. On occasion, this means the SCP-3835-1 instances have entertained the MTF with their minor reality warping abilities, and shared some of their unique anomalous trinkets, such as animate wood carvings. Unlike the pizzas purchased within, these items do not transfer back into reality when the effects of the THC wear off, indicating that the objects created by SCP-3835-1 occupy the same layer of reality as SCP-3835 itself. The reason for this is not fully known, but it is believed to be related to the fact that the pizzas must be transmuted before they can become non-anomalous. The ingredients that are used to make the pizza are likely to become beyond the reality warping capacity of the SCP-3835-1 instances when they are post-transmutation. Prior to that point, it is assumed that the SCP-3835-1 instances can manipulate the elements of the tree and nature into pizza, in the same way as all other trinkets. This means that instances of SCP-3835-1 might be able to transmute other items into lasting equivalents, but have limited their scope to pizza in order to better manage their presence. More research is being done into the past services that SCP-3835-1 living within SCP-3835 might have provided to the earlier eras of humanity, and if any transmuted artifacts are still intact on the less green side of reality. There is evidence that SCP-3835-1 has ancient enemies that need to be avoided at all cost, and alerting these other anomalies to their presence is something to be avoided altogether. These enemies include SCP-1000, otherwise known as the Bigfoot apes, who have notably never shown much interest or desire for pizza, making the dish a suitably distant commodity to specialize in. There also appears to be a slightly contentious but not openly hostile relationship between the SCP-3835-1 and the native denizens of SCP-4000, but due to the risks involved with a much more dangerous anomaly, the assigned agents of SCP-3835 have been asked to pry no further into questioning instances about the Keter class SCP. But an important question remains: why pizza in particular? Well, one skilled chef among the SCP-3835-1, whose self-styled name is Rogan Sethton, son of Snoop, has stated that pizza is something of a universally appreciated food item.
It's the same in every land since you humans invented it.
Rogan says,
Pizza is something that brings people together. Well, pizza and a little bit of the green stuff. Not money, but yeah, it can help us make that too.
Recently, a few members of Mobile Task Force Delta 20 asked Rogan to provide a list of ingredients that his fellow SCP-3835-1 instances used to create the initial form of the pizza. Most especially, the Foundation staff was curious about the unrecognizable substance that always seems to be added after as a coating to the pizza. Rogan simply shook his head and laughed.
Well, it wouldn't be much of a secret ingredient if I gave it away.
Hey there, fellas, put the kids to bed, because today we're gonna tell you about the opportunity of a lifetime. We know you're used to getting spoon-fed some lame anomaly by the squares that SCP explained, but don't worry, we gave them the night off. It's just you and me. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the proprietor of a certain specialty gentlemen's club that caters to,
well, let's say discerning clientele. You want to know my name? What are you, a cop? Get out of my face. Anyway, believe me when I say the operations of my totally legitimate business are deeply tied to the activities of some of the narcs at the SCP Foundation. There are plenty of so-called scary SCPs or awesome SCPs or, God forbid, wholesome SCPs. But I don't care about any of that. The real question is, what SCPs are the hottest? And I don't mean hot as in literally physically hot, you dangus. Like SCP-001, the Gate Guardian, and his crazy solar sword. Though I wish my bounce had one of those, it'd be nice to chop a freeloaders in half, what do you call it, the atomic level or what have you. I'm talking about SCPs that are total smoke shows. And no, I'm not talking about SCP-3792, an aerosol can full of black smoke that forms humanoid figures. But hey, if you're into that, I can see what I can do. I'm talking about the kinds of SCPs that they put an adult content warning in front of. Like SCP-4960, a literal sex and fertility goddess. Lovely woman, by the way. We worked together briefly in the 60s, but that's a story for another day. Maybe you're more on the furry side of the equation with SCP-1471, and you download Mal-O version 1.00 like it's Tinder because you want an appearance from SCP-1471-A. If you have a thing for silver foxes, maybe SCP-106 telling you a few of his war stories might be a good way to pass the time. And if you have a thing for literal foxes, SCP-953, the polymorphic humanoid, might be up your alley. Sure, she might trick you into killing your friends and eating your own organs, but ain't she gorgeous? And maybe even thinking about the Scarlet King and his big, hunky suit of armor makes you blush as red as blood he loves spilling. Look, I ain't here to judge. We are like a bad boy, and it doesn't get much better than an interdimensional tyrant who wants to destroy the whole multiverse. If any of this got you feeling a little hot under the collar, and you've confirmed already that you're not just experiencing a fever from a rapidly progressing SCP-008 infection, then my classy little joint might be the perfect recreational establishment for you. Of course, we work on a kind of honor system here, so I'll tell you about all this on the down low, as long as you promise to keep it to yourself, capiche? Because if you double-cross me on this one, some broken thumbs and pried-off kneecaps will feel like a free vacation from what I'll do to you. If you want to find us, head on down to East St. Louis, corner of Redacted Street and Redacted Avenue. We're pretty easy to recognize. From the outside, we look like a single-story brick building with real pretty colors. Come over to the west side of the building on Saturday at 2 a.m. and buddy boy, we will give you the time of your life. You'll know it's time for the fun to begin when my boy Big Mike exits the building and starts setting up the signs. One will be a sandwich board with a schedule of the night's entertainment. The other is my pride and joy, the big neon beauty on the side of the building reading Exotic Girls, or equivalent. Welcome to the Multiverse Strip Club. You make your way in with a few $100 and trust me, you're never gonna wanna leave. Though, full disclosure, we will boot you out on your ass if you decide to linger after 3:30 when the show ends. If you're still alive at that point. Did I just say alive? No, I didn't. You're just hearing things. You should really speak to a professional about that. Look, I'm not gonna treat you like a schmuck. I could tell you about how great the experience at my club is until the cows come home, but what reason do you have to trust me? How about instead I tell you about the special night a bunch of SCP Foundation D classes spent in my club on their boss's dime. I don't know how much you know about the barbaric practices of those squares at the SCP Foundation, but they ain't big on human rights. They farm out prison inmates to be their personal guinea pigs, and they have the gall to call us unethical. Being a D-class is a thankless job. They get sacrificed to monsters on the reg and put in needlessly dangerous situations. Hell, if 106 escapes, one of them gets put in a femur-breaking machine, so their screams of pain lure him back. If anyone deserves a night of sexy fun in my club, it was these three guys. Here even a Class D becomes a VIP, and believe me, we hire our fair share of double D-class personnel here too, and we treat them right, if you know what I mean. The D-classes waited outside the club for Big Mike to come let them in, then paid the door charge with their Foundation moolah. Those jerks at the SCP Foundation made them all bring in notebooks and pens to document everything they saw. Talk about adding insult to injury. You can't enjoy a night out if your head is stuck in a stupid notebook the whole time. You want your head stuck between a pair of... Wait, this is a family show? Ask your mom about that. Stay in school, kids. Needless to say, when those D-classes got inside, they were real impressed with what they saw. Our establishment may not look like much on the outside, but on the inside, baby, we got it all. Fine shag carpeting, mirrored walls, a disco ball, luxurious and comfortable seating, and a thick fabric curtain around the stage where the brass pole waits. The guys were excited to get some more action, and we were more than happy to oblige. We started them off nice and easy with the Kunbish sisters, the hottest pair of babes the Tuvan Republic has to offer. They have this incredible routine where the pair of them sit naked on a log and begin an incredible round of Tuvan throat singing, the exact same routine they did in Eurovision 1999, while giving each other a tasteful shiatsu massage. Clearly, the D-Class fellas were enjoying themselves, because they made it rain on that stage, and the Kunbish sisters repaid their kindness by singing a faster throat-singing ditty, which they performed in Eurovision 2003. Next came one of my favorites. Helen Keller took the stage, a woman as inspirational as she was hot, dressed in the Vegas showgirl outfit. Awooga! Am I right, fellas? She did a very classy strip show for the D-Boys while performing a choreographed dance routine to the song from Flashdance. When the guys made it rain, she put a pause on the dance routine and decided to recite some poetry, which moved the boys to tears and also led them to making it rain a little more on old Helen. We figured by this point the boys were a little more acclimated to our special brand of sensual entertainment. That's when we decided they were ready for the entertainment stylings of the fantastic Zippy and Trainer. If you thought the Kunbish sisters were a dynamic duo, then buddy, you ain't seen nothing yet. It's a lady and a live orangutan. Oh, and the lady has no head and also advanced necrotizing fasciitis. Fun fact, that's a flesh-eating disease. But don't let that put you off. They don't call her the Fantastic Zippy for nothing. Trainer, the orangutan, gives the Fantastic Zippy verbal commands to hit the pole and do her routine. Sure, some parts of her might fall off in the process, but that's only because she puts so much energy into it. When one of the D-classes threw her $5 bill, she slipped it into her exposed trachea, and the trainer ordered her backstage, finishing a routine that the surviving D-classes would never forget. Did I just say surviving? No, I didn't. You're just imagining things. Come on, let's move on. We decided after giving them a performer with no head to make sure the next performance had a little more bite. We released the girls, which is to say 4 velociraptors in perfectly tailored Japanese-made outfits. They took to the stage with plenty of growling and snarling. The D-classes admittedly started to look a little fearful, but I've always thought of fear as the greatest aphrodisiac. I can only imagine that's why 2 of the 3 D-classes decided to throw literally all of their money at the stage for these 4 very special gals. The other D-class split the rest of his money between the trio as the Raptors left, bringing their spicy performance to an end. Still, I think maybe these Raptor gals have a future in more mainstream entertainment, especially if they cross over with the SCP Foundation. Maybe we'll call it Dr. Kondraki's Raptor Maids. I don't know, we'll workshop the title. Give suggestions in the comments. Next, we prove to these D-classes that we can also stay up with the times and provide the cutting-edge and sleek, modern, erogenous technology. We did this with erotic_performance.exe, a program that runs on the incredibly advanced Gateway 2000 computer and monitor running a Fenstra 98 operating system. It hit those boys with a series of equations and 3D graphical representations that would surely drive any hot-blooded fellas totally wild. In the end, they inserted a $5 bill into the computer's floppy disk drive, and we moved them on to the next performance. The Council of Libidinous Elders were brought in next to switch things up. What, you've never heard of a Council of Libidinous Elders? Then you haven't lived, my friend. Each one is a levitating gelatinous mass filled with membranous fibers with powerful telepathic erotic abilities. They sent mental transmissions directly into the brains of those lucky D-classes, leading to feelings of brain pain, mild acute tinnitus, and most importantly of all, overwhelming physical stimulation, baby! We only had 2 performances left for them at this point. The first was a little number we like to call serial number 223244-09P. Okay, we lied. The number wasn't that little. This babe was all legs. Literally, she was just a pair of mechanical legs attached to an engine powered by pure ambergris. When the ambergris is poured in, she starts the most elegant river dance you ever did see. And for you Crush fans out there, we even put plates full of beetles underneath the legs so she can smash them all up. Oh, the D-classes, they loved it. Until the pungent musk of the crushed beetles made them feel a little nauseous. That's what love smells like. And for our most awaited performance of the night, we brought in a special performer. The Foundation dweebs call him SCP-1093, but I call him something else that I'm not allowed to tell you. He's a handsome dude wearing a sumo-style mawashi with a head so bright you literally can't see. It's a highly radioactive ball of pure light. And the version of him in my club also came with a big, sexy, ornate stone ceremonial knife. He leaped into the crowd and wrestled one of the D-classes before using the knife to remove their organs in a horrifying ritual sacrifice. Did I say that? No. Yeah, you're just imagining things. Don't just hear about it happening to other people. Come on down to the Multiverse strip club. We'll give you a night not even amnestics will make you forget.
Imagine you were out in public and you found yourself injured. Maybe you were in an accident and couldn't move, or someone had mugged you, and in the ensuing scuffle, you'd ended up getting hurt. Laying on the cold, filthy concrete of the sidewalk in desperate need of help, what could be the one thing that might make you feel even the slightest bit better? Something the very sight of would be enough to tell you everything was going to be okay. The flashing lights drawing closer, accompanied by the sound of tires on the road and a wailing siren, all signs that an ambulance is on its way. But what if the ambulance that came to assist you ended up making you feel far worse than you were before, and leaving you with injuries unlike anything you'd ever seen? What if it wasn't an ambulance at all that came to help you? What if you were found by SCP-4419 instead? Jeremy had been having a somewhat normal day until his accident. Work had been another shift of long, arduous hours spent behind his desk. 5 o'clock finally rolled around. He grabbed his bag and punched out. If he'd maybe left a few minutes later, he might have gotten away unscathed. Instead of getting caught in the mad rush of people leaving work, Jeremy usually took the back streets and avoided main roads as a shortcut to get home. There was less traffic, even during the rush, and that made crossing the streets safer, usually. He had been looking the other way when a car came speeding down the mostly empty side street. The driver had slammed the brakes, but only too late, knocking Jeremy down. Winded, he collapsed, unable to stand as the force of the impact had broken his leg. The driver and a few nearby onlookers huddled around Jeremy as he lay there with his injury. Suddenly, the noise of an ambulance caused the other pedestrians to mostly disperse. Still trying to catch his breath, in the last moments of his fading consciousness, the last thing he remembered seeing were a pair of figures. They had jostled rather aggressively through the crowd, reaching down to lift Jeremy up and shoved him into the emergency vehicle. They were considerably rude for medical professionals. Nobody around wanted to argue with them. Most would even go so far as to call them hostile, but that was nothing compared to the horror that awaited him when he reopened his eyes, laying back on the road where he'd been found. His body had been rearranged. He barely recognized it as his own. It was like he had been turned into some grotesque animal made using human parts. His arms and legs had been rearranged to protrude from his torso in an unnatural configuration. What felt even worse was that his fingers, toes, hands, feet, they all still worked. All Jeremy could do was scream until he slipped back under. A man turned into something else entirely. Bad days can happen to the best and worst of us, and sometimes those bad days can spiral into very, very bad nights. Mike had been having a night like that. Earlier that day, he'd lost a fair sum of money at the races. Gambling was one of his many vices, as was alcohol, and to commiserate his loss, Mike had hit the bar. Unfortunately, his already foul mood was nudged into full-blown temper when another patron accidentally bumped into him. The ensuing bar fight was a complete, disoriented, drunken mess of glasses being smashed and fists thrown. One managed to connect hard with Mike's jaw, breaking it and leaving him sat on the sidewalk in pain. Cop cars had shown up, officers breaking up the ruckus and paramedics arriving to treat the more badly injured patrons. It was then that 2 paramedics silently walked up to Mike and grabbed him by both arms. As much as he tried to pull away from their forceful grip, his arms were covered in bruises and cuts from the glass. Their fingers dug in, honing in on those painful, wounded spots so that Mike could really feel his own injuries as they pulled him up against his will. Trying to verbally protest only hurt his jaw further, meaning he could barely call for help as he was bundled into the back of an ambulance, doors slamming shut behind him. The next morning introduced Mike to a whole new and far grislier definition of the word hangover. One of the staff who worked at the bar found him, just waiting outside when she came up to open for business a few days later. Sitting out front, Mike had been left in the gutter, although it took the bartender a moment to notice just what was wrong with him. And when she saw it in full, she screamed. Instead of Mike's jaw being fixed, it had been wrenched open, far wider than natural. It was locked in a permanent, gaping expression, the sides of his lips sporting splits that ran all the way into his cheeks. Lodged between both rows of Mike's teeth, fused to his gums, was a piece of glass, too thick for him to break to free his jaw or even bite down on. A mouthful of glass shards and blood, cuts lining the inside of his cheeks, fragments lodged inside his tongue. All of that might have been preferable, a mercy, compared to what actually happened. The glass was keeping his mouth stretched out, stopping him from speaking like a transparent gag. And as if not being able to speak or beg for help wasn't bad enough, anyone that looked through that little window was also offered a whole other horrific view. They could see Mike's heart. It had been pulled from his chest and reattached at the back of his throat, still beating as tears rolled down his face. He couldn't eat, talk, only breathe through his nose, and it hurt. Reg and Lee had vowed when they first got married to love each other for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, until death did they part. And death very nearly almost parted them. If given the choice between dying together or suffering through what ended up being done to them, not even their love for each other would have made them want to stay alive. The rain was beating down on the windshield as the couple drove home in silence. They'd had a big argument. In fact, it was small in the grand scheme of their relationship, just a lover's quarrel. In that moment, though, it felt like the biggest problem in the world, as those types of squabbles often do. But it would have seemed quaint compared to the fate that awaited both Lee and her husband that night. Visibility was poor. The headlights were doing little to help Reg see through the downpour or the dark. He found it so hard to see that he almost missed their turn, quickly wrenching the steering wheel to try and correct the mistake. Reg lost control of the car as it slid on the slippery road, flipping sideways and rolling as the rain continued to pour. The airbags deployed. The force of being thrown around even with her seatbelt on caused Lee to suffer a number of broken ribs. Meanwhile, Reg's arm was broken when the driver's side door connected with the ground and dented inwards. As the couple were left buckled in their seats, upside down and both crying at the pain of their injuries, they spotted the unmistakable silhouette of an ambulance driving through the rain towards them. They were both so relieved that neither one of them realized they hadn't called the emergency number yet. Although the rain had long since stopped by the time Lee woke back up, the storm was just beginning. Her head was spinning. Everything was sore and aching. She had expected to be in a hospital, maybe with Reg in her bed beside her, both of them recovering but alive at least. Pushing herself up by her cut, bloody hands, Lee could feel something heavy behind her, a weight on her back, like having a rucksack strapped to her, only it was harder to move. Almost the same mass as a person. Slowly looking over her shoulder, Lee screamed when she saw the flesh of her back had been fused to Reg's, their skin melted and stuck together like candle wax, each of them unable to pull away without the pain of feeling like they were being ripped apart. To make matters worse, Lee had undergone other modifications. Talk about in sickness or health. Living alone, Rodney was relatively content with his life. Since retiring, he'd been able to spend his twilight years appreciating the little things, spending most of his time out in the garden, tending to his flowers, and occasionally enjoying the company of his adult son. Unfortunately, with old age comes the increased risk of health problems, and to say Rodney had himself more than his fair share of heart difficulties, or a bum ticker as he called it, was an understatement. While out in his garden, Rodney suffered a violent heart attack and collapsed, wheezing and struggling to breathe. Luckily, his son Keith was in the house at the time. He witnessed his elderly father drop to the ground and ran out to help him, calling for an ambulance as he tried to calm Rodney down. The emergency services seemed to arrive much quicker than Keith had been expecting, a pair of paramedics rushing through the house to lift his dad away. What struck him as strange was neither one would tell Keith which hospital they were taking his dad to, and they outright refused to let him ride in the back of the ambulance to keep Rodney lucid and reassure him that he was in safe hands. When Keith went to climb into the back, one of the paramedics pushed him by the chest with enough strength to knock him over. As he pulled himself off the concrete, the rear door slammed shut, and the ambulance sped away to God knows where with Rodney in the back. After a few days of hearing nothing, Keith had already tirelessly been calling every hospital in the area to ask if his dad had been admitted. None of them had seen Rodney, and his worried son had just been about to call the police to file a missing persons report when his elderly father appeared on the doorstep. Immediately, Keith drove his dad to the emergency room, trying to explain what had happened with the strange ambulance. While the hospital maintained that it wasn't one of theirs, they admitted Rodney and gave him a full examination, only to find something that would turn the stomachs of the world's most seasoned doctors. Rodney had more than one heart. Someone had given him not just a spare, but 11 additional hearts. They were stuffed between his natural organs, like too many books squeezed together on a shelf, and not one of them was beating. They were causing far more harm than good. Rodney's insides were riddled with these foreign bodies that were stopping his lungs from fully inflating, resting on his stomach, and wreaking havoc with his bodily functions. Upon discovery of these extra hearts, Rodney was rushed into the operating theater, with his son nervously pacing in the corridor outside. Sadly, a doctor would soon appear to tell Keith that the moment the surgeons removed one of the additional hearts, Rodney's old bum ticker had finally given out. Sometimes, as sad as it may be to reconcile with, tragedy strikes. One night, a fire broke out in a crowded bar, leading to a whole host of people suffering severe burns and requiring urgent medical attention. What they received instead was far more brutal and barbaric. Joyce had been in the bar when the alarm started to ring. Nobody knew what had started it, only that they needed to evacuate. But it didn't take the flames long to reach the alcohol behind the bar, and before long the whole place was ablaze, everyone panicking and barging past each other to get out. Once free of the searing heat, swapping it for the biting cold of the night air, the commotion didn't seem to end. Someone near her pointed to an ambulance that had just arrived, and a duo of paramedics that were manhandling some of the more badly burned bar patrons, forcing them into the back of their vehicle. Along with about 6 others, Joyce marched up as the group protested how the injured drinkers were being treated. When the paramedics refused to stop, things got uglier. The ensuing brawl left Joyce and the other 6 people with skull fractures, but rather than just leave them behind, the paramedics grabbed them too. Joyce was pushed into an already overcrowded ambulance. There were 26 people crammed in there total, including her. 19 of them had nasty burns on their skin, wounds that were only made worse by being packed together in such a tight space and jostled around as the ambulance drove away. There were no sign of the missing 26 bar patrons for around a week. The families of those that had disappeared after the fire urged the police to keep searching for them, with no bodies recovered at the scene by firefighters. Nobody had a clue where the group had gone. Joyce's partner, Al, even printed off missing flyers and handed them out to anyone who would take them. They also happened to be the caretaker of a local community center, and after another day of worrying tirelessly about Joyce, Al moped back there to clean and lock the place up. What they found waiting for them was like something out of an old horror B-movie, or something found in the deepest parts of the ocean. Filling one of the rooms of the community center was a huge, watery mass. It wasn't pure liquid, although Al first mistook it as the result of a leaking pipe. The mass was fluid. It twitched and shivered whenever they reached out to touch it, almost like a living thing, or what was left of a few living things. Say, 26 bar patrons melted down and reduced to a collective liquid mass. Now, you'd think having an accident out in public would be as bad as things got, but that's nothing compared to being injured in the line of duty, right in the middle of a war zone. That's what happened to Private Jackson. While he and his squad were out on a routine patrol in Afghanistan, a group of enemy insurgents ambushed the United States' soldiers. During the ensuing firefight, Private Jackson sustained a severe gunshot wound, leaving him bleeding out. His comrades had called for a medical evacuation and were expecting a U.S. Army helicopter to arrive at any moment. What none of them had expected was a city ambulance driving towards them across the battlefield as if it was the most normal sight on Earth. Already suspicious of the approaching vehicle, Private Jackson's fellow teammates raised their weapons at the approaching paramedics. Despite the soldiers' demands for them to identify themselves, neither one of the ambulance attendants seemed to pay them much mind, grabbing Private Jackson and dragging the wounded soldier towards the vehicle. He called to the rest of his squad wanting to be let go, having no idea where he was about to be taken or why. The commanding officer barked at the pair of EMTs, warning if they didn't release Private Jackson, then his men would open fire. Still, the paramedics didn't seem to be listening. Just as they threw Jackson into their ambulance and climbed into the cab at the front, the other soldiers opened fire. Squeezing their triggers, bullets were spat from their weapons, riddling the metal sides of the vehicle as it began to drive away, siren blaring and lights flashing. Every shot that connected with the ambulance seemed to cause it to leak a viscous black fluid, like an oil. But despite this, it did little to deter the ambulance from driving away with Jackson captive in the back. After being successfully extracted from the battlefield, the remainder of the squad were airlifted back to safety, arriving back at their nearby base the following day. Each one of them were solemnly silent. All of them were confused as to how an ambulance had even appeared in the desert out of nowhere and disappeared without a trace. But even more so, they were concerned for the life of their kidnapped comrade. However, they wouldn't have to wait long, as arriving at their barracks revealed the grim, grotesque fate of Private Johnson. He was on the walls, as in all over the walls. His body had been dissolved somehow, broken down into little more than a thin, bloody paste that had now been smeared over the interior of the barracks. Looking out at his former squad from the liquefied remains was a single human eyeball, Private Jackson's eye, wide with horror at what had been done to him. SCP-4419, known to some by the nickname of the Butcher's Chariot, is still out there. At present, it is unknown who, or indeed what, performs the horrific mutilations on its victims, or even why. It could be that SCP-4419, if it has a consciousness, could be trying to help those it abducts, but lacks the correct medical understanding of how to do so. Then again, it could simply just be cruel, torturing and deforming people unfortunate enough to need emergency medical attention. Given how sporadically this anomalous ambulance can appear and disappear, at the site of any medical emergency anywhere on the planet, there's little the Foundation can do other than stay vigilant and pick up SCP-4419's patients after it has mutilated them. Or rather, they can pick up whatever's left of their victims. Gather round, boys and girls, and those who are young at heart. We've talked a lot before about the wacky, occasionally wonderful, but always weird creations of the mysterious toy maker Dr. Wondertainment, and today we're going to do it again. It's time to crack open the SCP Foundation's toy chest and see what we can find inside. Dr. Wondertainment's inventions have been attracting the attention of the Foundation for quite some time, and with good reason. Whoever or whatever the whimsical, talented doctor is, there's no one else out there producing quite as many anomalous objects and marketing them to children as playthings. These aren't the toys you'll find in your neighborhood store or on someone's Amazon wish list. There's SCP-445, the super paper that comes alive in the form of whatever you fold it into. SCP-1508, or Mikey the Chore Buddy, a living cardboard robot designed to help kids with their chores. There are the adorable yet destructive fire-breathing dragon snails, or SCP-111, or SCP-958, General Beep, who teaches kids about military history and combat, and helps them build real working toy weapons. I could keep talking through the proverbial toy factory, but we'd be here all day. Maybe Dr. Wondertainment's most anomalous trait is how productive he manages to be. I can barely send a single email without 3 cups of coffee, but enough about me. One of the most well-known Dr. Wondertainment creations is the Little Misters line, a series of humanoid playmates with a variety of different traits. We've covered the Little Misters here on SCP Explained before, but let's do a quick refresh, just in case. There's Mr. Chameleon, Mr. Headless, Mr. Laugh, Mr. Forgetful, Mr. Shapey, Mr. Soap, Mr. Hungry, Mr. Brass, Mr. Hot, Mr. Life and Mr. Death, Mr. Fish, Mr. Moon, Mr. Red, Mr. Money, Mr. Lost, Mr. Lie, Mr. Mad, Mr. Scary, and Mr. Stripes. Each of these little misters, from the top hat-wearing fish to the man who can't remember a thing, they're each special in their own way. But wait a minute, looking at them all lined up like that, I can't help but feel like I'm missing something. It seems like a bit of a boys' club, right? And why let boys have all the fun? Well, it seems like Dr. Wondertainment thought the very same thing, because he made a little mister just for girls. Enter Miss Sweetie. the sweetest, pinkest gal around. At first glance, you might mistake Miss Sweetie for an ordinary woman, aside from her naturally pink hair and eyes. No wig or contact lenses here, but like the rest of her fellow misters, Miss Sweetie has more to her than meets the eye. So what lies beneath that candy-coated, sugary exterior? To crack open that hard candy shell and get the truth inside, we'll have to look a few years back to when Miss Sweetie first caught the attention of the Foundation. It all started in a small, unassuming town tucked away in a valley flanked on either side by mountains and thick forests. It was a peaceful place, if a bit boring. The worst thing anyone could remember happening in years was a cheating scandal at the yearly pie bake-off. Then, 10-year-old Nina went missing. Her family was terrified. They called the police right away, but the authorities insisted that it looked like a classic case of a little girl running away from home. After all, she had taken her backpack, her favorite toys, some sandwiches, and bottles of water from the fridge. She would come back home soon, probably later that day, and everyone would be able to laugh about this by tomorrow. But tomorrow came, and Nina still didn't return home. People began to whisper, the way folks in small towns always talk behind each other's backs. Was there some trouble at home? Nina had seemed like such a happy girl, so outgoing, leading her troop in Girl Scout cookie sales every year and singing solos in the school choir. Something must have been wrong, though. Otherwise, where did she go? Then others began to disappear. Tommy Bowers was last spotted walking home from school. He fell behind his friends, stopping to tie his shoe. When they noticed he was no longer with them and went back, he was gone. Then Mikey Paulson vanished on a camping trip in the nearby forest. His father left him alone for a second in broad daylight, just to gather some firewood for later that evening. And when he called out to his son for help carrying it, there was no reply. One boy was catching toads in the creek behind his house when he disappeared. Another was seemingly snatched while walking his dog. The dog, unharmed, ran back home on her own, dragging her leash behind her as she went. It had started with Nina, but now no one could be certain if it would stop. The townspeople began to panic, wondering who would be next, who was taking their children, and why. As it always does in small communities in the grips of terror, suspicion began to grow. Neighbors turned on each other, pointing fingers at anyone who seemed the least bit suspicious. Local police were baffled by the sudden slew of apparent kidnappings. Sure, they had a few potential suspects, an elderly woman with the local kids claiming that she was a witch, a school groundskeeper that just had a generally weird vibe about him, but none of the leads ever went anywhere. There was no evidence found at any of the scenes. Where there were footprints, there were only one set, the child's, leading off into the woods until they could no longer be tracked. Tensions were mounting, and no one could trust anyone anymore. In a town where people had always left their doors unlocked, people were boarding up their windows, pulling their children out of school, and keeping them home at all hours of the day. If they didn't, after all, their child could be the next one to vanish. After a week of nail-biting tension and looking for threats around every corner, the town was treated to a shocking surprise. Nina came home. Casually as you please, her parents saw her come skipping down the driveway, a little dirty and clearly exhausted, but cheerful. They embraced her, weeping, and she hugged them tight, asking them to please stop crying. "We didn't know where you were," her mother sobbed. "Didn't know if you were okay or..." "I'm fine," Nina insisted. "They let you go?" her father asked. "What? I just got hungry and I missed you, so I came back," Nina explained. "Who took you?" her mother asked. "No one took me. I was visiting my friend," Nina laughed. Her parents stared at her in shock. "What friend?" her father stammered. "The pink lady in the woods," Nina said simply, and then she rushed inside to grab a snack and say hello to the family cat. Police came by the house to speak with Nina, and after talking in circle about her friend in the woods and refusing to say that she was kidnapped, she agreed to show the officers where this lady in the woods was. Other than her location, all they could get out of Nina was that the lady was pink. She could do magic, and she had lots of friends. They had no way to know for certain, but they hoped that this mysterious woman would lead them to the missing boys. So that same day, a team of police officers, none of whom had ever seen more action than a parking ticket or a teenage vandal spray painting a wall, set out to recover the kidnapped children from the lady in the woods. It wasn't easy to navigate, following the directions of a child. What exactly did she mean by, "Go past the rock shaped like a butt," or "Look out for those purple flowers I like"? In spite of their obstacles, though, they were able to get their bearings. They realized they were getting close, though close to what, they couldn't quite be sure, when Officer Rita Flynn stepped on something that crunched loudly beneath her boot. What the? She lifted her shoe to find a piece of bright blue hard candy broken beneath the sole. Candy in the middle of the woods. As they searched the area around them, the rest of the officers found pieces of the same candy in different shapes and colors, all strangely inviting for candy that they found on the ground. They couldn't explain the significance of the candy, but they knew it meant they were getting close. They followed the multicolored candy trail like Hansel and Gretel tracking their path through the forest with crumbs of bread. They could hear footsteps up ahead, coming from a nearby clearing. Through the trees, the team of officers could make out a log cabin that looked like it had been abandoned for quite some time. As they drew closer to the cabin and the sounds of activity inside, several of the officers suddenly froze in their tracks. They insisted to be allowed to turn back, to go home. They couldn't explain why, but they knew they needed to leave, that something did not want them there. Officer Flynn, the only female officer in the group, scoffed at her colleagues. She urged them not to be cowards and to keep moving. There were children's lives at stake. This was no time to get cold feet. Still tentative, but feeling thoroughly shamed, the rest of the officers followed Rita towards the cabin. So far, so good. No sign of the missing boys, but no sign of foul play yet either. Then, behind her, Flynn heard Officer Simon let out a groan of pain. She turned and saw him doubled over, clutching his stomach. Before anyone could intervene, his knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, suddenly unconscious. Flynn ran to check his pulse, and it was steady, but he wouldn't wake up. His breath gave off a slightly sweet smell, and she remembered her great uncle and a trip he'd taken to the hospital. Somehow, Officer Simon had fallen into a diabetic coma right there in the woods. Before she had time to think too hard about it, Officer Paul collapsed in the exact same way right before her eyes. All around her as they attempted to approach the cabin, Flynn's fellow officers were dropping like flies. She turned back to the cabin, and her eye caught the shock of pink hair as a woman stepped out. She made eye contact with Flynn, who took note of her unusual vivid pink eyes, and she waved. "Hi there, what's your name?" she called in a syrupy, sweet voice. Officer Flynn drew her weapon. "Hands where I can see them." The pink-haired woman cocked her head in confusion, but complied. "No need to be so mean," she pouted. "It's just us girls." But that wasn't entirely true. In the forest behind the cabin, Officer Flynn could see humanoid figures trudging through the trees. But they weren't human. They were shiny, hard, and brightly colored. She thought of the candy she had stepped on earlier, and her jaw dropped. As the candy people approached her, she began to recognize their faces. The missing boys, each and every one of them, transformed somehow into living hard candy. Holding her weapon in one hand and keeping an eye on the pink-haired woman and her tiny candy army all the while, she pulled out her radio and called in the strangest report she had ever made. No one in the town, not even the chief of police, had ever heard of anything like this. But fortunately, the police chief knew someone who did. An old friend who devoted her time to investigating cases that were impossible to explain. Less than 24 hours after Officer Flynn made her call, the SCP Foundation was arriving at the scene to collect the candy children and the woman who would become known as Miss Sweetie. Officer Flynn's report, along with an in-depth study of both the hard candy pieces and the hard candy humanoids obtained from the crime scene, offered some insights into Miss Sweetie's abilities. Her presence inherently repels men that come within 50 yards of her, and any man that enters her radius will feel an immense desire to leave and go back in the opposite direction. If he is forced to continue his approach, then he will begin to feel ill, experiencing nausea, shortness of breath, and severe stomach pain. Finally, he would fall into what resembles a spontaneous diabetic coma. The only way for him to regain consciousness is to be brought back outside of the 50-yard radius. As for the hard candy, Foundation researchers gave one piece to a female D-class and another piece to a male D-class to test the effect it might have on different genders. When the woman ate her piece, she simply chewed, swallowed, and looked at the attending researcher in confusion as if to say, "What, was that it?" When the man ate his piece, however, his body began to undergo a rapid transformation. His blood sugar levels skyrocketed, rendering him immobile almost immediately. Over the next 12 hours, his flesh, bones, musculature, and all other parts of his body began to crystallize into hard candy. When the transformation was complete, the new entity attempted to free Miss Sweetie from her containment. He was neutralized using a flamethrower, which melted the sugar of his body down into a sticky puddle. Any person identifying as a male who eats a piece of this hard candy will experience a similar effect, just as the missing boys did. In some very rare cases, the transformed party will turn into a candy unicorn, rather than a humanoid creature, but the cause of these special cases is unknown. After Miss Sweetie was brought into Foundation custody and given her official designation of SCP-2396, specialized containment procedures were put in place to keep her in captivity. She was placed in Provisional Site 2396, and due to her distaste for men and boys, assigned a research staff that consisted entirely of women. Any men or masculine identifying individuals located within a 6-kilometer radius of the site were to be temporarily detained and questioned about any possible contact with SCP-2396. So every night in Provisional Site 2396 was Ladies' Night, but it wasn't much of a party. Researchers were preoccupied with finding a way to neutralize SCP-2396's anomalous effects. Most notably, in spite of her containment, small pieces of assorted hard candy, or SCP-2396-A, would be spontaneously generated within a 6-kilometer radius of Miss Sweetie. Any of these that were spotted would be incinerated on site, but the mobile task force in charge of supervising the area was having trouble keeping up. Male civilians were slipping through the cracks, eating the candy, and transforming into candy humanoids, or instances of SCP-2396-B, then storming the site and attempting to free Miss Sweetie from captivity. It was becoming untenable to keep her contained. The generation of instances of SCP-2396-A was directly connected to her regular consumption of sugar in all of its forms, which she requested as rations. The amount did not matter, nor did the form it took. She merely required something sweet once a day. Sometimes it was a bowl of pure cane sugar, sometimes a cup of maple syrup. On a staff member's birthday, they brought her a piece of chocolate cake, which she was especially delighted by. Eventually, they settled on a single liter of glucose syrup once a day, hoping it could slow things down by eliminating any whimsy or variation from the feedings. Every time, without fail, more instances of the anomalous candy would manifest soon after SCP-2396 ate her meal. There was talk of starving her to see if this could mitigate the generation of candies, but when denied sugary foods, Miss Sweetie would double over in pain, wailing about the agony she felt. The head researcher at the provisional site was horrified by the notion of torturing an anomaly that had done no intentional harm to anyone, and insisted they find another way. One researcher, Dr. O'Hurley, proposed a solution. Why not try a sugar substitute? They decided to test it out, giving SCP-2396 a liter of liquid sucralose. While behaving as though it was her ordinary dose of sugar, she accepted it graciously and made no complaints of pain at all. After switching to the sucralose, the candy stopped appearing. Miss Sweetie was reclassified as Euclid and moved to Site 19. After a week of the sucralose-based containment procedures, Dr. O'Hurley conducted her 5th interview with SCP-2396. For the sake of avoiding any potential outbursts, Miss Sweetie was led to believe that she was still producing candy, as well as living candy creatures. A transcript of this interview is included in SCP-2396's official file. Dr. O'Hurley sat down at the table, where Miss Sweetie was already waiting with a pleasant smile on her face. "Good morning, SCP-2396, Dr. O'Hurley began. Miss Sweetie scoffed and giggled at this opener. "Oh, come on, Cindy. You don't have to be all stuffy with your best gal." Dr. O'Hurley responded with a polite smile, neglecting to correct SCP-2396 on the fact that Cindy was not, in fact, her real name. Alright, SCP-2396, are you aware another SCP-2396-B attempted to breach your containment? She referred here to one of Miss Sweetie's candy soldiers. Miss Sweetie giggled. "That's just boys. Always gotta be making a big stink of things when they want to get your attention. Ain't it always like that? Never a man, always a boy. Always beating up their friends when they think they're getting too close. A man's always gotta have his hands busy, or else they're gonna be in the air. Dr. O'Hearly pressed the matter. They seem to be concentrating on taking you away from here. Are you unhappy here, SCP-2396? Miss Sweetie sighed. A woman ain't happy anywhere. Isn't that what they say? Dr. O'Hearly frowned. I'm not aware of any such saying. Miss Sweetie shrugged. It should be one. I don't know, Lucy. I just think it's because every gal wants this big strong lug to sweep her off her feet. And these are sweet boys deep down. Even if they're sticky, I'm sure they'd sweep you off your feet too, if you girls asked. Dr. O'Hearly thought about commenting on the inherent sexism and heteronormativity of this statement, but thought better of it. She also considered pointing out that Lucy was not her name either, but shook it off. Then what about the instances that resemble unicorns? Miss Sweetie lit up at the mention of these. Don't you just love unicorns? All little girls love unicorns. You can eat them too, when you get bored. Little girls get bored. It's good to have boys and unicorns you can eat when you're finished. Isn't that a little reductive? Dr. O'Hearly replied. Miss Sweetie appeared to become irritated. She rolled her eyes. Look, Toots, I'm a girl's toy, and it's a man's world. What do you want from me? Is that why you repel men? Because you're a girl's toy? Miss Sweetie nodded. Dr. W didn't like it when boys break their sisters' toys. Told me it was damn near the worst thing in the world. And they can't break me. They can't even come near me. Well, except if they're, all sweet and handsome. And you're happy with the way things are? Dr. O'Hearly asked. Miss Sweetie paused for a moment to consider, then answered, Dr. W's good in my book. I always had a sweet tooth, and I always wanted to be a girl. Kind of an okay trade-off, if you ask me. You guys ain't so bad, though. Even if the food's crap. Don't know how you mess up sugar, Sarah, but you guys make it taste like crap. Aside from complaining about its taste and no longer being able to produce any of her anomalous candy, the sucralose substitute had no adverse effects on SCP-2396. At this point in time, no containment measures beyond this dietary change, and making sure all staff that interact with her identify as women have been necessary. So, Miss Sweetie sits in her cell in the low-security wing of Site-19, missing her favorite sugary treats, but otherwise content with the way things are. And on the outside, no more unsuspecting boys are being transformed into confectionery against their will. Just to be safe, though, if you're ever out walking and you see pieces of delicious-looking hard candy scattered along the ground, just remember what your parents always said. Don't take candy from strangers. You just never know where it came from. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone who sat around the long oak table was sweating in their business suits, tugging at their ties so that it might dislodge the collective lumps in everyone's throats. At the head of the table, someone sat facing away from the rest of the gathered executives, their silk-gloved hands interlocked, the crown of a top hat just visible over the back of their broad, throne-like chair.
So, my friends,
they said without turning around, in a voice that filled the boardroom.
What a sorry state of affairs this is. The SCP Foundation sticking their noses in, sniffling around the company, shutting down factories. And then there are our customers too obsessed with Fortnite to be interested in the toys we're making. If Wondertainment Enterprises can't touch the hearts of every man, woman, and child on the planet, then what are we even doing here? What is our point?
A pause lingered. Nobody in the room knew whether to answer or keep quiet and let somebody else speak first.
That wasn't a rhetorical question,
the voice yelled from its chair.
We are a company that makes toys. That is our point, and that's why you're here, so go ahead, don't be shy. Pitch me something.
After another moment of silence, one of the board members nervously stood up from his chair. Attempting to straighten his tie, he produced a box containing a prototype. I might have something, Doctor, he said, nervously struggling to compose himself.
Go on.
Opening the box, the man produced a small circular spinning top with jagged edges, or a Beyblade to those born after 1999. So, 90s nostalgia is back, in right now, the executive stammered, assembling the Beyblade in his shaking hands. And Wondertainment Enterprises can be the first to relaunch this popular playground craze from back in the day. He pulled the ripcord, letting the spinning toy loose on the desk. Instead of spiraling in a circle, though, the Beyblade shot across the table's surface and hopped down to the floor, a tiny voice emanating from it the entire time.
No, please don't make me fight. I can't. I won't do it. I don't want to die.
It sobbed as it raced across the floor and out the door. Realizing he didn't need to say anything else, the board member sat back down. Another stood up, more eager now that somebody else had gone first. Well, we were thinking something more for the younger market, she declared. She produced a large flashcard that displayed an image of a pretty ordinary-looking hobby horse. You can't really go wrong with the classic, right? She asked, looking around the room for any looks of approval from the rest of the board. Anyway, these hobby horses are durable. They come in a range of colors. There's just, one little caveat. We got some calls from the Italian Prime Minister after we'd been testing them. Apparently at the exact same time someone rocks on one of these hobby horses, a random person in Italy just gets turned to dust. We currently have, no way of counteracting this. There were a few short murmurs from the rest of the board. Sensing she was losing them, the same executive signaled her assistant, who retrieved something from outside the boardroom. As she re-entered, she was holding a teddy bear at arm's length, grimacing in disgust. The rest of the board quickly realized why. The bear carried with it a pungent stench that hung heavy in the air. Keeping with that younger market I was talking about, the exec piped up again, holding her nose shut. Kids love gross-out humor, right? You put a fart in an animated movie and the tykes go nuts for it. So this delightful product, the Stinky Bear, can bring the same enjoyment into the home for the low price of $39.99. Are those the same bears that R&D was testing a while back? One of the other Wondertainment executives asked. The ones that had a 1 in 5 chance of releasing lethal amounts of Novichok? Wait, isn't that a Russian nerve agent? Another exclaimed in horror. Get that stinky bear out of here! Defeated, the presenting executive retook her seat, while her assistant carried the bear to the incinerator. Well, this has been a poor show thus far, came the good doctor's voice from the far end of the table, interrupted by a tinny electronic beeping. Mr. Glenridge, what is that in your pocket? Oh, sorry, feeding time. The board member, Mr. Glenridge, apologized, pulling out a tiny oval-shaped device and, oddly enough, a candy bar. It's a Tamagotchi, you remember those, right? Well, we whipped up this one to be more intelligent, but it keeps demanding actual solid food, so I just have to, Glenridge then proceeded to tear open the candy wrapper and began mushing it into the Tamagotchi's LCD screen. The virtual pet made a number of sad-sounding beeps, almost like it was crying over its own lack of taste buds.
I think the problem here is obvious.
A stuffier, older member of the board, Mr. Omer, spoke up.
Look, we all know that the dang kids are too distracted by their darn cell phones these days. And sure, we could sit here and try to get them interested in the anomalous entertainment we're trying to sell them. Or we could try to profit off them by going after what we know they're already obsessed with.
I really don't think you should pursue this train of thought, Mr. Omer. An executive named McClaren interjected.
No, this is a good idea,
Omer protested.
It's simple. We develop an app, a video game that the kids won't be able to get enough of. But here's the catch. In order to progress in that game, we can encourage them to spend real cash in exchange for some kind of virtual currency that can only be used in the app. It'd be essentially worthless, useless even, anywhere other than inside our game, but if they want to be the best at it, then the kids will have to keep coughing over the dough. And hey, we could even throw in some kernel-grade spyware too, so when they have the app on their phones, it simultaneously harvests all their personal data and...
At the snap of the doctor's gloved fingers, Mr. Omer was suddenly vaporized, letting off one final shriek as he turned into a pile of ash on the table. I think Mr. Omer failed to realize that many other companies already beat us to the punch with that idea. Dr. Wondertainment sighed, exasperated. And besides, we aren't monsters. Somebody else take the floor, please. Well, McClaren mumbled, standing up, wiping some of Mr. Omer's ash off their glasses. Our social media team has been doing some research into current online trends, and it turns out we might have something that fits with a really popular one. Claren produced a pristine doll's house, a 2-scale recreation of a single-story home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They opened up the walls, revealing a group of figurines inside, each one moving of its own accord, mimicking verbal speech with a series of little noises. Lifting off the house's plastic roof, a tiny sculpted pizza slipped off the tiles. So, we built this a while ago during the peak of the show's popularity, Claren explained. It's a doll's house. The dolls inside are somewhat alive, as you can see, but they're always acting out the plot of Breaking Bad scene by scene in broadcast order. Sure enough, one of the dolls was a miniature bald-headed Walter White, making some little squeaks that sounded like it was saying,
I am the one who knocks.
Breaking Bad has had a major resurgence in meme culture lately, so this could be a viable product. One of the other board members chimed in. Right, exactly. Clarence smiled nervously. Of course, we'd have to sort out a licensing agreement with AMC, otherwise we might get sued. Returning to their seat, Claren trailed off, hoping someone else would step in to fill the latest bout of uncomfortable silence. Wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, a Mr. Ash took the floor, his assistant wheeling in a projector and hooking it up to a laptop. The rest of the executives couldn't hear the imaginary building drumroll in Ash's head as he walked up and began to play a video clip. My fellow board members, he announced with a well-rehearsed beaming smile. As interesting as some of these other pitches have been, I believe I may well have something truly special to show you. Behold, the Dr. Wondertainment Zoomatron pedal car. Through the projector, the video showed a large plastic toy car with a crash test dummy sitting in it. It gradually began building up speed at an impressive rate for an outdoor toy. The Zoomatron was whipping around an indoor testing track faster and faster until it was little more than a blur, a speeding ring of constant motion. The board could just make out the dummy's arms flailing limply thanks to the sheer G-force. I'm almost afraid to ask, Mr. Glenridge cleared his throat and spoke up, but exactly how fast does that thing go? I'm very glad you asked, Mr. Ash replied excitedly. It can reach up to Mach 6 with just an average amount of pedals per second, or PPS if you will. But surely that's dangerous, Mix Claren queried. I mean, an object of that size moving 6 times the speed of sound that low to the ground? I won't deny there have been a few, let's call them teething problems, Ash admitted. Almost on cue, the video showed a Wondertainment Enterprises worker stepping accidentally into the path of the speeding pedal car, only to vanish in a split second as it whizzed by. The car shot into and then through a nearby wall. You have anything else, Mr. Ash? Dr. Wondertainment asked impatiently from their chair. He stammered, rummaging through some papers. In a similar vein, we also developed an electric scooter. You know, like those bird ones you see people riding around on a lot. Doesn't go quite as fast as the Zoomatron, so that could potentially be safer. Marginally. I meant to say marginally safer. What's the catch with this one? A board member asked, their exasperation obvious in their tone. It's probably better if I just show you, Mr. Ash sighed. He pressed play on another testing clip wherein a Wondertainment employee stood atop their scooter. At first, it seemed to be moving normally. That is, until the camera filming it zoomed out. The employee and the scooter were floating several feet in the air. We're still waiting for that staff member to return from their journey, he said sheepishly. I'll just sit back down. What if we made a yo-yo out of lasagna? Mr. Glenridge asked. The rest of the board all turned to look at him confused, before he receded in his chair out of embarrassment, fiddling with his starving Tamagotchi in the hopes that the next outlandish toy idea would make everyone forget what he had just said. Luckily enough, one of the execs, Miss Stevenson, opened up her briefcase and produced a brightly colored stuffed bear. If I might bring us back to basics, she announced, or bear six if you pardon the pun. We won't, Dr. Wondertainment said bluntly. Oh, well, allow me to introduce the Doesn't Care Bear. Stevenson forced a smile, then handed the bear to the nearest board member. What am I supposed to do with this? Mr. Ash asked, confused. Just press the stomach, Miss Stevenson urged, giving him a wide-eyed glare as if to say either, work with me here or please help. Doing as instructed, Ash gave the Doesn't Care Bear a gentle squeeze, activating a voice box somewhere inside it. Wow, Marlin, your surgeon really conned you for those hair plugs, the bear sneered cruelly. Mr. Ash instinctively reached up to his forehead, where his hairline had been noticeably receding until only a few months ago, but he'd never told anyone about his transplant. In truth, it was something he felt pretty insecure about. I don't know what it meant by that, Mr. Ash protested, playing it off with a half-hearted chuckle. Darn thing must be defective. Not as defective as your scalp, Marlin! The bear gave another callous jeer. Did you seriously think that looked realistic? Nobody's hairline is that ruler straight, not naturally anyway. Maybe if you've been a baker like your dad wanted you to, you could have avoided all the stress that made you lose your hair in the first place. Then again, you were never that good of a son to him anyway. How in the hell do you turn this awful thing off? Mr. Ash asked frantically, holding back tears. Isn't it great? Miss Stevenson said, forcing a toothy grin.
Imagine how great it would be for boosting kids' confidence. By honing in on their worst insecurities? McClaren raised an eyebrow. Presenting them with something they don't like about themselves will challenge them to improve on it, Stevenson argued in an unjustly condescending voice. That's just basic reverse psychology. Deborah, taking a one-day course doesn't make you a clinical psychiatrist, the Doesn't Care Bear retorted. You know, you really aren't as smart as you want people to think you are. How about a modern update of an old classic? Mr. Jeffries, an older executive, spoke up, excitedly setting up something on the table in front of him. It was a pair of foldable playing boards, with a collection of tiny ships, each one a different size and shape. McClaren, if you'd be so kind, he said, passing them one half of the board game. That's just Battleship, Stevenson retorted, stuffing the abrasive bear back into her briefcase. Ah, but wait, Mr. Jeffries replied jovially, finished placing his miniature boats. Now then, give me a coordinate. B6? Clarence said. Direct hit! Jeffries clapped his hands excitedly. It was then that everyone noticed a tiny streak of smoke shooting up from one of the ships on Clarence's board. Glowing, it soared directly upwards, leaving a trail behind it, climbing through the air over the table. Then, once it was above Mr. Jeffries' board, the little glowing projectile began to plummet straight back down. At once, the board members all realized it was a miniature missile, some of them urgently ducking under their desks before it struck its target. A small explosion erupted on Mr. Jeffries' board, punctuated by a miniature fireball and cloud of black smoke that wafted up only to be sucked into the boardroom's air purifier. From the battleship that had just been hit with shrunken ordnance, the Wondertainment execs could hear some tiny, barely audible voices. They were screaming and shouting in a state of panic. Mayday, mayday, and abandoned ship, swim for your lives were the only words anyone could clearly decipher. Battleship Extreme Edition, Mr. Jeffries announced proudly with a chuckle, met with looks of concern from the board members brave enough to sit back down in their chairs. While we're on the topic of games, McClaren spoke up again, I did have this. They produced a handheld video game player, the kind that only featured one classic title. Fortunately, the particular title was Pac-Man, the distinctive music and flapping sound of the titular character's mouth instantly recognizable even to the youngest members of the Wondertainment Enterprises board. Come on, Kay, one of the executives sighed. We're all waiting to hear the catch. It's, this one's actually pretty horrible, they admitted, handing the game across the table to Mr. Glenridge. Seemingly happy to be free from the Tamagotchi's pleas for food, he began absent-mindedly playing Pac-Man. I mean, it handles well, he observed, guiding the yellow mouth flapping icon around the maze, avoiding multicolored ghosts as he chomped down on any dots in his path. It's quite a throwback, too. 80s nostalgia is still hot right now, isn't it? Ooh, power capsule! Mr. Glenridge hit the corresponding buttons to lead Pac-Man towards the larger dot, which granted him a power-up ability to eat the ghosts that were patrolling the maze. Tapping away with both thumbs, he got Pac-Man to follow in the path of one of the ghosts. Then the handheld game started screaming. Billy! Billy, please, no! Shrieked a tinny 8-bit voice. Ma? Mr. Glenridge's face went pale, drained of all color as he stared horrified at the game in his hands. Pac-Man kept following the path of the fleeing ghost, gaining on it. The closer he got, the louder the compressed screaming got. Billy, stop! Don't let him eat me, please, son! But sure enough, Pac-Man caught up with the ghost and kept up his perpetual chomping. As the ghost was eaten in the game, the built-in speaker played the blood-curdling cries of Mr. Glenridge's mother over the classic theme music. Silently, with a look of pure shock on his face, Glenridge put the game down on the desk. So, yeah, there's that, Clarence said awkwardly. A Pac-Man game with the souls of dead relatives trapped inside. These toys are all... Well, perfectly useless, let's be honest, the good doctor erupted. Are you forgetting we have the SCP Foundation breathing down our necks? Surely any one of these abominations would have them poking around and investigating us even more. How about this? One of the execs interrupted. Picture Monopoly, but Site 19 edition. We could really get our own back on the Foundation. Expose where the anomalies are kept. Just generally cause some trouble for them. Oh, the playing pieces could be some of the things they have in containment. Another joined in. Instead of the shoe, the car, and the iron, we might have an anomalous shoe, car, and iron. And being sent to jail in the game would turn a player into a member of their D-class personnel, the first board member replied. Enough! The doctor's booming voice silenced the whole room. That is, without a doubt, one of the most absurdly stupid ideas I have heard in the history of this company. With respect,
Somebody spoke up. "I think you're all overthinking this." One of the board members who had been sat at the furthest end of the table, keeping quiet throughout the rest of the farcical presentations, suddenly stood up. Adjusting his tie, he addressed his fellow Wondertainment executives. "Doctor, you'd like your company to uphold its core purpose to make toys and reach people all over the globe," he stated. "And as a healthy added bonus, you'd like to stick it to those killjoys over at the SCP Foundation too. So why don't we do something that will cover all those bases?"
"That's what we've all been trying to do,"
Glenridge protested. "Like I said, you're overthinking it," the exec replied. "Let me show you something." Casually, he produced a stylized plush. The group leaned in, astonished to see it resembled SCP-049, better known as the Plague Doctor. "We make plushies," the board member paused for dramatic effect, "of the Foundation's SCPs." "Very intriguing," Dr. Wondertainment declared, finally turning their chair around to face forward, examining the Plague Doctor plush in their gloved hand. Anyone who types scpswag.com into their search engine of choice will find high-quality plushies of some of the SCP Foundation's most beloved anomalies. There was a tortuous pause. The members of the boardroom could barely breathe as Dr. Wondertainment rose to his feet and began to clap.
"You son of a bitch. I'm in."
On April 16, 1999, the Raleigh Ripper was finally brought to justice after a reign of terror across the state of North Carolina that left 14 women dead. The killer's true identity had been Kevin Gruber, a local gas station attendant originally from West Virginia, who was arrested at work in the early hours of the morning. His face was plastered all over the media when he was cuffed and dragged in to be questioned and processed. Like many serial killers, the most frightening thing about Kevin was the fact that he just seemed so normal. The idea that a person like this could have committed the atrocities of the Raleigh Ripper raised a frightening question we all need to contend with. What turns a person into a monster? This question was particularly prescient for Dr. James Whittington, a criminal psychologist tasked with conducting the first official psychological evaluation on Gruber. Ever since the true identity of the killer had come to light, the case had held a particular fascination for him, mainly because Gruber the man and Gruber the killer seemed to almost be two entirely separate people. According to all evidence, the Raleigh Ripper was an insidious, methodical criminal genius. He'd stalked some of his victims, all women who lived alone, for weeks before striking, conducting detailed surveillance of their homes that allowed him to isolate them, bypass their security systems, and remove any means of getting help. He blocked doors, cut phone lines, and always selected vulnerable targets. Despite being a seasoned criminal psychologist, the actual details of Gruber's crimes had kept Whittington awake at night. He had a wife and a young son at home, and the thought of a man like Gruber prowling out there made him fear for both of them. This was no thrill killer. He was a sadistic torturer who seemed to delight in the pain and terror of his prey. He'd chosen victims he could take his time with, infiltrated their homes like a gust of cold air through an open window, and slipped out through darkness like a shadow. Perfectly controlled crime scenes, no stray evidence, nothing but death left behind. For months, he'd run circles around the police. Thousands of people who fit the Raleigh Ripper profile were interviewed. Sting operations were conducted. Communities formed neighborhood watches to keep each other safe from the killer's next move. And none of it did any good. From seasoned detectives to legions of beat cops, nobody could get the jump on Kevin Gruber. The fact he was even caught came out of pure chance. A local hiker, Mike Fletcher, just so happened to hear the screaming coming from a nearby home in the woods and made the heroic decision to run in and intervene. When he walked in on Gruber committing the attack, the killer panicked and fled through an open window. In his haste, he left a partial print on the window frame. That, combined with Mike's description of the assailant, was enough to finally link Kevin to the 14 murders of the Raleigh Ripper. The problem, from Dr. Whittington's perspective, was that by all accounts, Kevin Gruber seemed to be an idiot. This was no suave, charismatic Ted Bundy type. In all the prior photos and interviews, Kevin had that deer-in-the-headlights look of a man who's just in way over his head. Dr. Whittington had also pored over Kevin's school records. The only thing he seemed to excel at was being mediocre. He even got held back a year in 5th grade. Since graduating high school, he'd been kicked out by his parents for freeloading and hadn't been able to consistently hold down a job for more than 8 months. His only prior criminal convictions had been one drunk and disorderly conduct charge and possession of an ounce of pot back in 1991, for which he got a suspended sentence due to being a minor at the time. It just didn't make sense to Dr. Whittington that this man and the diabolically brilliant Raleigh Ripper were the same person, despite all the incontrovertible evidence proving it so. Despite his reservations, he needed to meet this man and find out why and how he committed all these horrific murders, despite being such an unremarkable individual. Sitting across from Gruber in the secure interview chamber, Whittington was once again struck with how incredibly disappointing he was. Thin and wiry, with glazed-over eyes, messy hair, and a pathetic tuft of weak stubble on his chin, he looked more like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo than a cold-blooded killer. His answers to most of Dr. Whittington's questions were also insubstantial, with him often losing his train of thought, or even needing to ask the psychologist to carefully explain the question to him. Most of the time, Gruber tried to make irritating slow-motion small talk concerning everything from the weather to movies he enjoyed. The interview had been utterly worthless. Until 4 hours in, Gruber mentioned something that awakened a strange memory in Dr. Whittington. He said, "Hey, say Doc, you remember that TV show Bobble the Clown? I loved that show as a kid. It was like my religion. Your kid ever watch it?" There were a number of unsettling things about this. From the fact that for some reason Dr. Whittington could remember something about Bobble the Clown, to the fact that Kevin Gruber had no way of knowing that Dr. Whittington even had a kid. But still, he didn't let his concern show, and instead asked Gruber what he remembered about Bobble the Clown. Gruber smiled and replied, "Old Bobble taught me everything I know, Doc." To which Dr. Whittington asked the million-dollar question, "Like what, Kevin?" Gruber shrugged and just said, "All kinds of stuff, Doc. Like how to watch without being seen, how to Jimmy open a window without making a sound, how to make him hurt real bad without him dying, so you can even make it last longer, so it can be more fun. And of course, he taught me to get out without leaving anything behind. Well, Bobble made this all possible, Doc, and he told me all about you too, that all this was gonna happen someday. All good things have to come to an end eventually, right? Tell the wife and kid he says hi, by the way." Dr. Whittington was astounded. Gruber seemed to stare vacantly off into space for a moment, before suddenly claiming that he had a terrible headache, and he needed to go back to his cell. In any other situation, Whittington might have just written off Bobble the Clown as one of two things: a psychotic delusion or a sophisticated psychopath faking a psychotic delusion in hopes of getting the insanity plea. Like the Son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz, pretending a demonic talking dog possessed by Satan made him commit all of his murders. But Whittington had heard of this Bobble the Clown before, and it wasn't in this scenario that a gas station clerk like Kevin Gruber ever would have heard of. It took half a day of research into his own archived notes to remember exactly where he'd heard it before. A child he'd interviewed almost a decade ago, who shoved gasoline and fireworks through the letterbox of an old woman's home, leading to a fire that left the woman and her dog dead. When Dr. Whittington interviewed the crying child about his motives, he'd said that it wasn't his fault. Bobble the Clown had told him to do it on the TV. Given that there were no records of a Bobble the Clown show ever airing on any local networks, Whittington had written it off at the time as the overactive imagination of a very frightened, very disturbed young child. That same child would later go into psychiatric care before reoffending as a serial arsonist upon release. The last building he ever burned down had only one occupant: himself. Fire investigators would later state that he had just sat there, legs crossed, placidly waiting for the flames to lick his bones clean. It was becoming incredibly clear that this Bobble the Clown fantasy, if it were even a fantasy at all, seemed to be much more than an isolated phenomenon. He used his credentials to start exploring other strange crimes of passion committed by children and young adults, even asking some of his friends in the criminal psychology community, off the record, if they'd ever heard of such a concept before. Frighteningly, it didn't take Dr. Whittington very long at all to hit pay dirt. There was the case of the Orfeo family murders in 1985 out in Arkansas. 9-year-old Donnie Orfeo had taken his dad's rifle out of the cabinet in the dead of night and walked room to room shooting his mother, father, and 2 older sisters in their beds. Neighbors had heard the gunshots and called the police. By the time they arrived at the scene, the only survivor was Donnie Orfeo himself, drenched in blood sitting in front of the TV. His hollow eyes stared zombie-like into the static. He did not resist arrest. When Donnie was taken in for questioning, his emotional responses were cold and flat. When he was asked why he murdered his family, he said that it was because his father told him he was watching too much TV. His favorite TV character, Bobble the Clown, had told him that if he murdered his family with Daddy's gun, he could watch as much TV as he liked. Just reading this, Dr. Whittington could feel sweat beading on his brow. 2 cases were a coincidence, but 3 were a pattern. And oh, how he wished it had stopped at just 3. From 4 days of searching, he discovered no fewer than 17 different seemingly isolated crimes with mentions of Bobble the Clown attached to the file. A 5-year-old boy from New Jersey who drowned his neighbor's cat in a river with a gym bag full of heavy stones told police that he'd learned the technique from Bobble the Clown. An 8-year-old girl, arrested for tying up and torturing her sister with a rusty coat hanger in Texas, had, of course, gotten the idea from watching an episode of Bobble the Clown. Murder, assault, vandalism, torture, an extensive countrywide rap sheet all led back to that one recurring factor. They all learned it from watching Bobble the Clown. Dr. Whittington had gotten in contact with a few friends who knew people in broadcasting. While carefully omitting some of the grislier details, he implored them for any new information on whether a TV show with Bobble the Clown had ever gone out anywhere. But despite their best efforts, they didn't find any records of Bobble the Clown or any similar educational clown shows airing. Was it possibly some complex shared hallucination? Dr. Whittington simultaneously felt burdened by all this terrifying knowledge and utterly powerless to do anything useful with it. If he started blowing the whistle to the media or his superiors that a spat of horrible crimes were all being caused by a violent imaginary clown, he'd just look as deranged as any of the people he'd been studying. There seemed to be nothing he could do to stop or help any of this. He returned home that night with a heavy heart, hanging up his coat. He needed someone to talk to about all this, but he couldn't burden his wife with the horrors he encountered daily on the job, much less a living nightmare like this mysterious Bobble the Clown. As he walked towards the kitchen to pour himself a stiff drink, he heard strange, jaunty music coming from the living room. He stepped back and saw his 7-year-old son Ben watching something on TV. As he stepped closer, he could scarcely believe his eyes. Ben, entranced, eyes fixed on a dancing, grinning, animated clown on the screen. Ben slowly turned his head towards Dr. Whittington, eyes wide and bulging, and said, "I've been waiting for you to get home, Daddy." Bobble said he got tired of playing with Kevin. He wants to play with us now. Dr. Whittington turned and looked at the clown on the screen again. He could swear it was smiling right at him. That was the last thing he remembered before the sudden, intense headache and the ground standing up to embrace him. When he woke up, he was in bed with his wife, and neither of them could move, thanks to the heavy ropes binding their body to the frame. Bobble is very good at teaching children to tie knots. They tried to scream, but a shiny flash of duct tape held both of their mouths closed. Dr. Whittington's eyes swiveled in his head to Ben, standing at his bedside. The boy was holding a kitchen knife, and he was very eager to show his mom and dad the fun new trick Bobble the Clown had taught him. To the SCP Foundation, this terrifying anomalous TV show is known as SCP-993, known to cause blackouts in adults and violent antisocial behavior in children. They do their best to keep the broadcasts contained, but if ever a child in your life seems to be acting strangely, perhaps ask yourself very carefully what they're watching when you're not around. Now go check out The Secret at the Bottom of SCP-087 Explained and Procedure 110 Montauk Revealed Fear Alone SCP-231 Tale for more harrowing tales of anomalous terror.